Doctor Who, despite being my favourite show of all time, it's undeniable that for the last 13 years the show has been an absolute letdown, with the individual series quality being an astounding,
I mean, it's alright, like,
at best, and absolutely catastrophic at worst. And that's not even taking into account the Chibnall era, an era that has done so much irreparable damage to the show that this new era is basically going to be a soft reboot. Again! But I can safely say that this is the first time I've been excited for new Doctor Who in about 5 years. This is the most excited I've been since Jodie Whittaker was announced as the 13th Doctor. We have a brand new Doctor in Ncuti Gatwa, an interesting looking new companion that absolutely disgracefully I'm older than, and the greatest showrunner of all time writing for this show again. Russell T Davies, back at the helm to bring this show back to its former glory once more. But before we get to all of that brilliance, we have 3 new specials to celebrate 60 years of this show, with the greatest Doctor of all time and one of the greatest companions of all time coming back. And best believe when this was announced I was beyond excited. Not only because, well, these are 2 of the greatest actors playing some of the greatest characters in the show's history, but they're being written by the best writer with a huge new budget and so much potential to do interesting stuff with them. So many questions are raised immediately just by the existence of this, like, why has the Doctor become David Tennant again? How are they going to write around Donna not being able to remember the Doctor without dying? And how are we in a timeline so blessed that all of this is happening in the year of our Lord 2023? Now, before I most likely gush about this episode for God knows how long, I just want to say that one of my biggest hopes for these specials is that Russell T Davies actually fixes some of the issues that he left between these 2. Maybe he can get a better explanation for these 2 meeting other than contriving it and saying it was destiny. Maybe we can get a further explanation for one of the only bad scenes in The End of Time Part 2. But honestly, I'm just happy to be having good Doctor Who again, given that the last episodes above a 6 out of 10 came out in 2017, and both still have massive issues in them. So, let's finally, for the first time in years, review good Doctor Who again, with The Star Beast. So the episode starts with a cute little recap showing the Doctor and Donna's adventures from back in 2008. God damn, I am old. And I really like how they present this as the Doctor and Donna separately recounting these events, because it's a good way to hook in new viewers without breaking immersion for the story, and just a casual reminder for us long-time viewers of the events of the past. And it hooks us in straight away by still asking the question of, why does the Doctor have this face again? And Donna saying the storm's about to break, referring to her memories coming back, which this story handled way better than I thought it would, but we'll get to that later. That being said, the first frame of this special being the Doctor stood here like this is irrationally funny. And then we get a look at our new title sequence, and I'm not gonna lie, I have very mixed emotions on this. On one hand, the colours are excellent and the visuals are generally very impressive. That being said, why is it so short? This intro clocks in at less than 30 seconds, the shortest of the revival by a significant amount. And while this might sound like a nitpick, I really think having it this short ruins a lot of the impact that almost all the other title sequences had. Like, every other title sequence will have the beat of the music hit the same time that a name pops up on screen, and because of those 2 things happening at the same time, it gets you excited straight away for what you're about to see. Whereas here, the names just pop up and go really quickly, almost as if they don't even matter. I'll show a comparison so you know what I mean. See what I mean? It just doesn't hit the same. Now, if this title sequence is only for these specials, then this won't really matter in the end, But if this is the one that they use for Series 14 and beyond as well, I'll be really disappointed. New theme slaps though. So the unfortunately still ugly TARDIS lands and we see the Doctor waltzing out of it, and one thing I'm really glad this episode didn't do was the whole high on regeneration after just regenerating stick that the show usually does. I have nothing against it personally, but it does get a little bit old after a while. And given that we've already seen David Tennant do this shtick before, I think it's a really great idea to just have him immediately revert back to his old self without all the eccentric goofiness for a whole episode, considering we've only got 3. After a bit of happily waltzing around very reminiscent of the next Doctor, he sees someone struggling with boxes, so he goes to help. And he comedically does this when he sees who's carrying the boxes.
Oi, do you mind?
And as if one bombshell wasn't enough for the Doctor, she then shouts for Rose.
Rose! Rose!
What?
Rose!
I knew we were so insanely back with goated Doctor Who the second the show actually managed to make me laugh with it and not just at it, unlike the previous eras. Then we get another classic Donna moment as she manages to miss a massive spaceship crash down to Earth.
I met them last Christmas.
Why? What happened then?
Great big spaceship, hovering over London. You didn't notice?
I had a bit of a hangover.
I'm not gonna lie, as funny as it is to keep up running jokes like this, as long as they're actually funny, this does come off as very unbelievable. Because even someone as gobby as Donna would surely notice the shaking impact that hit the atmosphere as soon as the ship came down and the literal bang that it made when it hit the ground. This does come off as a bit contrived, unfortunately. So Donna roasts the Doctor for being old and wearing skinny suits, and then he meets Sean Temple Noble from The End of Time, and gets him to drive him to the crash site. And we even get another funny joke.
That's his Grand Mistress.
Catch up.
I have missed good humour in this show so much. Like, it's been such a long time since I could watch the show and actually have a good laugh, like, you know. So the Doctor incorrectly uses his own catchphrase.
And let's allons-y.
For those who don't know, in English, this would translate to let's go. LaMayo. So we get some natural exposition interwoven with some comedy where the Doctor catches up with what Donna's been doing over the last 15 years. And it's revealed that she gave away all the money the Doctor got her for her wedding gift to charity. Bit of a stinger since this money was indirectly from her own dad who'd passed away, and it's not revealed why she did it yet, but what it leads into later is excellent, but we'll just have to wait to see about that. So Unit casually arrest a broadcaster live on TV, as you do, and we see the Doctor sneak in. We cut to Donna and Rose to see Rose getting mocked for being trans, and for the first time in an embarrassingly long amount of time, I've got to say, I'm really glad that the show's handling issues like these really well. Don't get me wrong, Stephen Moffat and Chris Chibnall, I'm sure had good intentions with their LGBT reps, but they both handled them so poorly in the show. Tasman just felt like it was trying to, and I hate to use the word, but just queerbait, because it was so surface level and superficial, and given that neither Yaz or the 13th Doctor had any depth, or really any good chemistry that was believable, it just came off as a poor attempt at getting people to ship them to get the show more attention. Which it clearly failed at. And Moffat's attempts at writing LGBT reps were so really incredibly bad. Especially with how he wrote Clara. She was written in a way as if being bisexual was a fetish, and it had no depth besides her randomly mentioning kissing women at several points. Which, even as someone who isn't a part of the LGBT, it just gave me second-hand embarrassment with how out of touch it felt to watch. It was so insanely unrealistic, it was just... ugh. Same applies to Bill, who was handled significantly better, don't get me wrong, but her sexuality also wasn't really used for anything meaningful with a lot of the time used for it. Like most of the time, the only scenes really mentioning it boiled down to just Moffat telling the audience that he wrote the first openly gay companion. Like, yeah, we know that. why don't you tell us something else about her as a person? Or, if you're gonna keep bringing it up unnecessarily, why don't you explore her sexuality more? Neither of which he actually did. By the way, I know it sounds bad saying like it was brought up for Bill's sexuality to be bad, but it wasn't the fact that it was brought up, it was the fact that stories would contrive themselves in a way to bring it up, but then not do anything with it, so it was literally just a waste of time. I explain it better in my Series 10 reviews, I'm not gonna lie. Like, I wrote all those scripts 2 years ago, and I'm probably never watching Series 10 again, so this is coming off the top of the dome, really. However, throughout this whole story, Rose is written in a way which actually has depth to it, and the scenes discussing it are presented very realistically and in a way which will be great for younger viewers, because it normalizes being trans, and introduces it to them in a way which is very natural, and immediately shows that the people who are opposed to such things shouldn't be listened to. Because being trans is normal, and if anyone out there is against that idea or is opposed to it in any way, they shouldn't be listened to or even really acknowledged, because they just aren't worth your time. A sad fact of reality is that a lot of people will grow up experiencing racism, homophobia, transphobia, or have even been brought up around those ideals, but that isn't okay. And I'm incredibly grateful that Russell has went through the effort of introducing these images to people when they're young, and even to older viewers shown this in a way which is nuanced and interesting, unlike what Moffat did with Bill. Because the way Rose was dead named in the scene was very realistic.
Looking good, Jason.
I've literally witnessed stuff like this happen in real life, unlike what Moffat did with Bill. Because if there was any scene where any homophobia was happening with Bill, it was characterized in such a cartoony way that it was impossible to take seriously, because it just felt so stupid and unrealistic in the scene. Also, this first scene addressing the topic brilliantly shows that no matter your identity, you'll always have people to stick up for you, with Donna immediately, without a second of doubt, sticking up for and defending Rose, which is fantastic. And the lines later on about feeling like she's from another planet not only make great narrative sense later, but also give us a view into her world and how she feels, which is great, putting us into her shoes and showing us how it feels from a trans person's perspective. I usually would say fuck them kids as well. Because personally, I think all kids are hellspawns and should get sent off to an island only for the strongest ones to survive. Bravo, Russell. You somehow managed to write in a great message to a show which is brilliant for all ages, but particularly the younger ones. Usually the demographic of this show that I think should be ignored the most. One of a kind. One thing that Russell T Davies, Catherine Tate, and Jacqueline King all nailed in this episode is the dynamic between Donna and Sylvia. They've both slipped back into their roles effortlessly and haven't missed a beat. The way they have their little mini bickers in such a funny way, while Sylvia also hilariously tries her best to stray away from any conversations involving aliens or extraterrestrial action, is so reminiscent of how they were in the past. The nagging mum and the everyman daughter dynamic never gets old and hasn't aged a day. It just makes you picture how Sylvia would have had to try and explain away so much of the stupid nonsense that's happened over the last 15 years. Honestly, I just wish her luck, because there ain't no way. And I love the way Donna talks about how she knows she has something missing, not only because it keeps up the great story beats from before.
And then sometimes I see this look on her face, like she's so sad that she can't remember why.
But this is a great way of building up more sympathy for the character, because she did have the whole arc of doubting herself, putting herself down by thinking she wasn't important, until she proved how important she was, only to have it all taken away from her. And even now, she has almost everything she wants. A beautiful daughter, a loving husband, the wonderful Wilf in her life. And Sylvia's there as well, I guess. But she still feels like there's something missing. It's so interesting to hear this from her perspective, because it almost gives Donna a depression angle, because sometimes when you are depressed, you just feel like something is missing in your life, despite nothing actually going wrong from your point of view. And this also perfectly mirrors the 10th Doctor, because he lost himself so much when he lost Donna, and his depression caused from that led to some of the most interesting stuff the show had ever seen. So Rose sees an escape pod that fell off the ship and then meets the Meep. And I've got to say, I absolutely love this thing. Its design is brilliant, and the practical work done on the animatronic is incredible. The way they brought this thing to life from its original comic design is incredible, and it's honestly one of the most impressive pieces of practical design the show's ever seen. As far as I can tell with my basic knowledge of filmmaking, throughout the story they use a mixture of practical work and VFX magic to bring it to life, but not once does this creature actually look like it's not there, or does its presence take you out of the story. It's been realised fantastically. Stark juxtaposition for the last era where almost nothing that wasn't practical felt real, and the CGI was embarrassingly bad. I really hope that these specials can keep that up because the VFX and general visual presentation of the last couple series has been really horrific. The fact that this show's most visually impressive series aired in 2011 and hasn't been topped since says it all, really. And back on the subject of the Meep, let's just be for real, this thing is adorable. I honestly can't think of the last time Doctor Who had an alien in it which was just cute, and its cuteness actually plays a vital part in the story, which makes it all the better that it is so cute. And Miriam Margolyes gives such a brilliant performance with her voice of the Meep, really selling you on this lost little creature's innocence, and it makes the turn for the characters later all the more impactful. So we cut back to the greatest of all time and we hear little motifs of the classic 9th and 10th Doctor theme, which gave me so many goosebumps the first time I saw it you'd be convinced I was Meglos. Unfortunately here we see the Doctor doing this with the sonic screwdriver, which I really don't like, and it seems like a very Moffat thing to be written into the story, sort of just because it looks cool. Because do we honestly believe that even for a second that the Sonic being able to make floating blueprints like this would never have came in useful before? And only now, for some reason, nearly 20 years into the revival, are we seeing this for the first time? Like, maybe if we saw the Sonic get upgraded itself, or saw the Doctor tinkering with it before the plot started, this would be more excusable, but without either of those things, this is a little bit irritating. This scene also brings up one of my biggest gripes of the story, but this one, take with a grain of salt because it is very preemptive, because there's still 2 more specials to come out after this one, and they will most likely address it. That being said, I really do wish that this story would have delved into the Doctor's identity crisis more, because this is absolutely huge. Never, not once in the 60 years that this show has been around has the Doctor used the same face twice. No, this does not count, Moffat. This is absolutely huge, and one of the lines that got me the most excited for this return was the Doctor saying, "I don't know who I am anymore." But this story doesn't really do much with it besides people asking the Doctor, and the Doctor just saying, "I don't know." 14 is just very accepting immediately that he got his face back and doesn't seem to be actively seeking to find out why very much. And yes, while it was in character for the 10th Doctor to run away from problems, particularly those that would revolve in death, or anything that would make him upset, it was one of his intentional flaws that was explored brilliantly throughout his era. Here, there's nothing to run away from, and seemingly nothing to worry about besides running into Donna again, which is another thing I hope they explain why it actually happens, because this story just asks the question and we don't find out why. I don't doubt that Russell will explain these things later on. This is why this is very preemptive criticism. This is the only time I'm writing reviews without seeing the whole series first, so I actually don't know, or at least somewhat know what's going to happen next. But just in case, in the millions to one scenario that he decides he doesn't want to be his brilliant self, that's there just in case.
And it's at this point that my busy life and general slow timing on making videos nowadays anyway has caught up with me. Because despite what I literally just said, all of the specials are now released, and I now know what happens in all of them, so I will be making points addressing future episodes when needs be. And unsurprisingly, Russell did explain in a satisfying way why the Doctor's face came back in the Giggle. And this episode not delving enough into it is still a bit of an issue. Also, Russell never gives an in-universe explanation as to why his clothes changed when he regenerated, which sucks. Back to the main review.
Universe, I absolutely love her. Oh, do I say things like that now?
This little line is all the more brilliant when you remember that this is one of the things the 10th Doctor never got the satisfaction of saying, even though he obviously wanted to on so many occasions.
I don't age. I regenerate. But humans decay. You wither and you die. Imagine watching that happen to someone that you... Rose Tyler.
What was the last thing you said to me?
I said Rose Tyler. Does it need saying?
I never thought I'd see the day I'm saying this, but this is a great way to develop the 10th Doctor's character by having him gain experience from the past 3 Doctors. Which, considering they're all considerably worse than him by a significant amount, is really impressive that Russell T Davies has managed to spin these negatives into a positive. Something the 10th Doctor always wanted and yearned for, but never got to have, and he can very simply express it openly now. Brilliant way to show character growth.
I don't believe in destiny, but if destiny exists, then it is heading for Donna Noble.
He will knock 4 times. It can't be stopped. Don't die with us.
No, because someone told me just recently. They said I was going to die. They said he will knock 4 times, and I think I know what that means, and it doesn't mean right here, right now.
Don't believe in destiny, you say?
Really? Wow.
So the Doctor jumps on the back of the truck and the unit soldiers open up the ship, only to be blasted by the 0 point from Fortnite, which possesses them and they start storming off. We then cut to Rose going into the shed with the Meep, where we get more goofy, silly cuteness from the Meep. A sentence that I just said completely unironically because this thing is so goddamn adorable and I can't help myself. So Donna comes barging in because Rose hasn't done the bins, literally every parent who ever lived ever, until the Meep eventually gets shown in a typically hilarious Donna way.
What the hell?
So naturally shit starts hitting the fan in every which way in another typically hilarious charming way, which this show has missed severely for so many years, with so many funny lines interwoven between this scene, and I just gotta play some of them.
We've got a bloody Martian in the shed! On the end!
Oh, wow, he's so cute.
Don't look, it doesn't exist! It doesn't exist! Get off me, you space rat!
Something smells nice.
My only issue with this little funny chaotic scene is when Sylvia slaps the Doctor. Usually every slap in New Who has been incredibly unjustified and written in a way which makes the character unlikable, because it is literally assault. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty sure assault isn't justified most of the time. But here, despite being played for laughs but still not being funny, here you can at least justify Sylvia wanting to keep the Doctor away from Donna, given the severity of what she knows can happen.
Because if she remembers, just for a second, she'll burn up. You can never tell her.
So here, while I still don't like that this is played for a laugh, I'm glad there's at least a somewhat justifiable reason for it. For once. Also, unfortunately, the next scene highlights for me one of the biggest issues in any of these specials, and that's how, in this episode, the Doctor is so remarkably irresponsible and seemingly negligent to keeping Donna safe with how he talks and acts around her. While this story tries to justify it with this line,
You said if she sees you again, she will die.
Well, no, if she remembers me, that's slightly different.
and yes, while that is in line with what the Doctor had said before,
If she ever remembers me, her mind will burn and she will die.
that doesn't give the Doctor reason to be so irresponsible with his identity in front of her, like not even being able to think of a made-up name like John Smith, asking questions about things he shouldn't know, using the sonic screwdriver in such a blatant way, fucking giving it to Donna to hold, talking about knowing Kate when Unit is mentioned, which would obviously immediately raise suspicions, and even casually mentioning that he has 2 hearts, and when Sylvia tries to correct him by saying he's being metaphorical, he just shrugs it off.
Like a metaphor, like 2 minds, don't you?
Considering the danger that this puts Donna in, and that the Doctor wouldn't even go near her in the end of time considering the risk, and the fact that her remembering his face almost killed her, this comes off as insanely out of character and irresponsible for the Doctor. And considering that this episode was written by the greatest character writer for this show ever, probably one of the greatest character writers ever for any show ever, who's given us multiple of the best contributions to literature and fiction as a whole, it's incredibly surprising and disappointing that Russell would write the Doctor this way, especially considering that the 10th Doctor was his magnum opus character, and here he is writing the 14th Doctor as an irresponsible moron. When did Stephen Moffat start writing this episode? Easily the worst aspect of this entire episode. It's a massive L in every regard. Honestly, it's the biggest L of all of these specials. Another huge L is that after this story showed us some great trans representation stuff, it gave us this terrible scene where the Doctor assumes the Meep's pronouns as he starts... And first of all, to start off with, makes no sense as a whole, because of the Doctor's knowledge of almost every species that ever lived ever. Like, are we seriously expected to believe that the Doctor wouldn't recognize the Meeps given gender or required pronouns, given how smart this character has been shown to be throughout this entire show? And also considering that in Wild Blue Yonder he correctly identifies the gender of literal, actual bones of an alien species, this scene comes off as incredibly forced. It's also written in a Moffat sort of way where you have to sacrifice logic or characters' established attributes just to get the outcome you want.
How was this made? Seriously, how was this ever acceptable? That this could not have flown back then, even then, right?
So Rose corrects the Doctor, which would never happen because the Doctor is smart, and the Meep gives quite possibly the worst response you could ever imagine.
My chosen pronoun is the definite article.
Ignoring the fact of how cringe this is on its own, it's just a completely unnecessary scene on its own, and I think the reason all of those loser out-of-touch boomers were crying about this episode, literally just having a trans person in, wouldn't at all be validated by anyone else on the internet if this scene just didn't exist. But to be fair, people who were complaining about that in the first place, they seriously just need to go outside and get a life. Trans people be like, I'm trans. Society. Okay.
Mayonnaise on an escalator! It's going upstairs, so see you later! Bye-bye!
So the Meep explains why the Wrath Warriors are after the Meep, and the possessed unit soldiers and the Wrath Warriors start scrapping in the house. Excellent scene interwoven with classic Russell T Davies action and charm and humour. However, another one of this episode's biggest issues is showing off when the Doctor uses the sonic screwdriver to make a bloody force field to protect the nobles, and this is a massive issue. Sure, the visual interactive blueprints are a bit of a minor issue, but this is absolutely huge. Imagine how useful this would have been 100,000 times before right now, but it was never used before and will most likely never be used again, because if it is used again, it will kill any tension for future episodes if the Doctor can just put a force field in front of himself, willy-nilly just because the script says so. Why is Russell pulling a Moffat? It's seriously so disappointing to see the GOAT write in such a terrible, contrived way like this. And it continues this streak of shit when the Doctor manages to resonate concrete in a matter of seconds so they can escape through the lofts.
Rose, I'm trying to resonate concrete.
I don't think the idea of resonating concrete is bad, but when it's done this quickly, it comes off as even more contrivances on top of the stack that this episode is quickly piling up. And the episode was going so well. So the Doctor takes them to the place where I sell drugs to kids, and then comedically yet seriously pulls a court session out of nowhere to invoke the Shadow Proclamation. Remember the Shadow Proclamation? Well, I do. And hopefully, unlike the last time it was mentioned, Russell actually uses it as a recurring theme in series 14 and beyond, which would be great for world building, which the first era was so good at. So after pointing out the obvious issues with that last fight scene, like the taxi being unmarked and that the soldier wasn't dead, though if they didn't want anyone dead, it doesn't explain why they'd do this. The Doctor comes to the natural conclusion that the Meep must have been lying and was using its cute persona and voice to trick people into helping it. And the switch up in Miriam Margolyes's performance at this point is absolutely fantastic. The twist itself, on the other hand, I'm not so sure, because I've heard multiple people say they weren't expecting it, and many others say that they did, but I can't really comment on it because I know the original story, so I knew this would happen eventually. But personally, I think if you didn't know, then the episode handled the twist pretty well.
Stupid woman with your weird child!
Well, that was just completely unnecessary. So the Doctor cleverly ensures the safety of himself and the nobles, and Donna starts questioning him in the car, showing some of that classic Donna doubt and regret for not saving her money. And we get more of a hint that Donna is starting to remember the Doctor, which still, for some reason, completely unfazes the Doctor, and only Sylvia seems to be worried about it. What is happening? Why did this episode start taking such a massive nosedive out of nowhere? So the Meep reverts to that of a cartoon villain simply hell-bent on destruction because plot, and plans on using the dagger drive to wipe out 9 million people in London, and for some reason the Doctor doesn't even try to do his usual reasoning shtick for some reason.
Yeah, essentially what happened is all the animatronics, they just for some reason changed for some reason, right?
Usually, in a well-written Russell T Davies episode, I would say this could act as a subtle nod towards the character needing to retire because he's wearing himself out. But this episode does very little of the Doctor's identity crisis, unfortunately, until the very, very end, which is another huge shame. Maybe instead of wasting time with this cringe scene, we could have been shown the Doctor attempt to do his usual spiel, but he actively fucks it up and makes it worse. That seems like the sort of thing Russell would usually do. You know, intentional character flaws, something he absolutely excelled at, but nah, because this scene was clearly so important.
Home and then you'll never see me again.
You're assuming he as a pronoun.
What?
So surely the goat saves them. Glad she's seemingly a recurring character because she has enough sass and charisma to carry very simple scenes well. So Donna shockingly goes to help the Doctor and calls him by his name, which is where the suspense for this episode would be through the roof, but unfortunately the trailers had already shown that Donna was in the other 2 episodes, so they're nowhere near as intense, given that most people already know that she'll survive regardless. But given I know someone who went into these episodes completely blind, I know how effectively they work on their own. Basically my take on the Sim Master reveal in World Enough in Time, but in reverse. If you don't know, just watch the video, it's good. So the Doctor tries to stop the Meep ship, but then the Meep deadlock seals the ship and puts down a barrier, and only now does the Doctor show a sudden interest in trying to keep Donna safe. Don't get me wrong, 14 is a brilliant incarnation of the Doctor, but he's written in such a mixed way in this episode. He's extremely inconsistent in one scene, but then he can be the brilliant Doctor we all know and love in another. It makes him really annoying to watch in this episode. However, that being said, this next scene is absolutely brilliant, where the Doctor has to come to terms with the fact he has to kill Donna. Direct juxtaposition to what he'd said earlier in the episode.
I won't be the one who kills her.
This is also an absolutely fantastic parallel to the end of time, where the Doctor has to sacrifice himself to save Wilf, and he has a mental breakdown over it. But here, he has a mental breakdown because he has to sacrifice Donna to save London.
Why does it have to be this?
Even more evidence of David Tennant being the best actor to play the role of the Doctor, because when you look at this purely logically, it's such an easy decision to make. One life versus all of London. But that becomes such a difficult decision to make when you know the person you have to kill, and have such a close connection to them, especially when she's done so much for the Doctor, and the Doctor had to lose her in the first place. And I love that all this time later, the Doctor still won't accept Donna for not thinking she's important, and even gets angry at her for thinking that she's nothing. It's such a great way to keep in line with what made their dynamic so brilliant in the first place. The fact that the Doctor sees something in everyone and Donna could do the same but never to herself, it's brilliant. So the Doctor reawakens the Dr. Donna, and we get the hilarious reveal that the Doctor left a bit of his subconscious in Donna's mind, which is why she gave away all of her money to charity. Which is such a great reveal, and it had me giggling like a little bitch the first time I'd seen it.
Oh, I'll show you destruction, mate.
We are so incredibly back, it is insane. So you know that thing in Last of the Time Lords that everyone complains about? Just saying that the Doctor reversed time and there was no consequences? Even though if you actually watch the episode, they literally explain why it happens and it makes perfect sense. Well, for some reason, Russell decided to forget how to write temporarily and actually did that resolution for this story. Are you fucking for real? This is such a lazy way to write this story. It's actually so incredibly over. Like, why would the Doctor and Donna even stop in this machine, suddenly just rebuild all of the roads and buildings that the dagger drive destroyed in the first place? That doesn't make sense!
Ah, damn it! I'm about to lose my freaking mind!
And it is never explained as to how this happens. So Donna starts dying, and this scene is excellently done and really plays up the emotion well, and both actors are killing it. But like I said before, it doesn't really work amazingly for me personally because I already know she's gonna survive. My friend said it had him on the edge of his seat, however. It's such a perfect ending to the Meta-Crisis storyline. Donna knowing that she can die happy and content, having saved the world and getting back what she lost at the same time. It would really suck if this was undone completely randomly.
What? You're not dead.
Huh?
Okay, so it turns out that Donna passed down some of the Meta-Crisis to Rose, and this would allow Donna to survive. This on its own I actually don't have a problem with, but this reveal plays itself off as so incredibly clever when there's literally no hints towards this throughout the entire story. Like, how the fuck was anyone on Earth going to think that Rose using a shed as a space to make toys was her subconscious memory of the TARDIS? Maybe if she used something that resembled a TARDIS more than a shed?
It looks like a fucking TARDIS!
And even the explanation of the toys being the monsters that Donna and the Doctor had faced, that actually would be a satisfying payoff. But we aren't shown any of them in the episode previously until this flashback. And while I think the idea of Rose being able to live with it so well because the Doctor isn't definitively male or female is a good idea in concept with an important message, because this episode plays this reveal off as so incredibly self-indulgent and smart, as if this was the plan all along, it just comes off as a bit annoying. Because you can guarantee that when Donna was saying binary and Journey's End that it wasn't referring to the meaning of binary gender, considering that she was talking about fixing the TARDIS. And while I don't have a problem with the explanation of how Donna survives, this scene is so incredibly self-indulgent in thinking that it is clever, it honestly gives off Moffat vibes, and that is not a good thing. And it only gets worse when somehow Donna and Rose can just let it go?
What? Huh? What?
That doesn't make any sense whatsoever! So, all this time, the Doctor lived with this trauma from losing Donna. She could have just let it go? Pardon the French, but why didn't you just do that in the fucking first place? And also, what is this?
We've got all that power, but there is a way to get rid of it. Something a male-presenting Time Lord will never understand.
And I am saying this with complete and full honesty. Genuinely, what does this mean? I haven't got a single clue what this is supposed to mean. I've asked everyone I know who's seen this episode what they think this means, and none of them have given us a definitive answer. Hell, I even went on the absolute hellscape that is Doctor Who Twitter for the first time in probably like 4 years because it's such a toxic shithole, and I still don't know what this is supposed to mean. Like, I've seen a few people praising Russell for putting the line in. You already know the type of fan they are. Toxic positivity type beat. But because of the toxic positivity mindset, because it's so vapid and devoid of actual opinion, of course none of them ever elaborated on why they would like the line. They just said, bravo. But why? It just doesn't make any sense to me as to why it's even here. And even if they could just get rid of it out of their body, how the hell would the Doctor not know that? You know, considering how intelligent of a character the Doctor is meant to be. And the definite worst part of that self-indulgent bullshit is that it completely undermines Rose accepting her identity, which would actually be a really hard-hitting and impactful scene, but because it's preceding such a shit scene, it really undersells how important someone coming to terms with their identity is. So the Meep goes away after a cryptic message which hopefully will get a payoff in series 14 or 15, and they go back to the TARDIS. And I've got to say, this thing is absolutely magnificent. First of all,
would you look at the size of that monster?
But everything about this TARDIS is so clean and chic that it just works so perfectly. The console looks brilliant, and for the first time in 6 years, it finally has that aura back to it. Gone are the days of the cheap-looking, dimly lit, then overlit, crappy cave. Hello, the future! And so brings this episode to an end. Exactly the way you would expect it to end.
One tiny little trip.
12 seconds later.
Oh my god,
We can end up anywhere in time and space.
I said so!
So, that was the Star Beast. And I've got to say, this episode has gone down in my estimations quite a bit upon further rewatches. While I still think this episode is a fun and fine watch with David Tennant and Catherine Tate absolutely killing it, as if their series wasn't 15 years ago, and all of the classic Russell T Davies charm and writing is there, the plot, on the other hand, in this episode is incredibly questionable at times, particularly in the second half. Like, there is so much incompetence in this script that it is honestly surprising, given the track record of the man who wrote this. Like, why did Russell make the sonic screwdriver in this story so incredibly overpowered? This was an issue that came around after he was showrunner, but he's massively exacerbated it with this story alone. Like being able to make high-functioning shields out of nowhere and resonate in concrete as quickly as it does. And on that note of the Doctor, I cannot believe how Russell writes him in this story. While obviously David Tennant is as brilliant as he always is, this man is just the definitive Doctor. The Doctor is written incredibly moronic in this story, more specifically with how he acts around Donna. Like, he acts like being around her is such a negligible thing when, lest we forget...
Just go to her now, go on, just run across the street, go up and say hello.
If she ever remembers me, her mind will burn and she will die.
Yet throughout this story, he acts incredibly doctory around her, gets her actively involved with the aliens, casually mentions he has 2 hearts, and even hands her the sonic screwdriver as if it's nothing. What is wrong with you, you absolute doylem? How have you so conveniently forgotten about something so major in your life that brought you that much grief that it had a major part in your actions leading to this? This is just so unlike you. And while I don't want to get political in any way here, because I honestly couldn't give a shit about anyone's political leanings whatsoever, do whatever the fuck makes you happy as long as you aren't hurting anyone is my perspective. But the way Russell wrote in some of the lines in this story comes off as incredibly pandering and forced, which is mad, considering this man's work on Doctor Who alone, he has the best reps, even though Zara was a long time ago, which is a bit embarrassing. But also consider his works on the masterclasses such as It's a Sin and Queer as Folk. But for some reason in this story, he bends the narrative and sacrifices the logic of some scenes just to put in lines like this.
My chosen pronoun is the definite article.
And like I said before, as if the Doctor isn't intelligent enough to know stuff like this anyway. And the Meep plot just fucking dissolves the second the turn happens. Despite this episode having great performances for the first time in forever, except Yasmin Finney, I'm afraid.
She can't act. She's terrible. I don't know how to tell her.
Loads of charm, great humour, and excellent character stuff interwoven throughout. I'm afraid, overall, it's mid. It's mid. There's too many little issues that stack up throughout the whole runtime and actual nonsense at points to call this episode anything relating to good. While undoubtedly this is the best episode in years, overall, It's pretty disappointing, and it's a pretty disappointing way to start the new era of this show. Something that cannot be said about the next episode, because up next is Wild Blue Yonder. Oh my god, who let bro cook? After the unbelievable mid that was the Star Beast, I can't lie, I wasn't amazingly optimistic about the new era. Sure, Russell was able to retain a lot of his writing quirks that made him the show's best writer in the first place, but he also showed a lack of care about what should have been very crucial elements of the story, which brought down the episode significantly. But to the shock of me and many others, Russell's second story back as showrunner, his second Doctor Who story in 13 years, absolutely blows out of proportion every single story that came after he left. I'm not even joking. This is bro's second story back at the helm, and he absolutely decimated every single story in the Moffat or the Chibnall era. I couldn't believe it either. Well, I could for the Chibnall era for obvious reasons, but for the Moffat era, as much as I slander it, it's not like it's fully incapable of having good episodes. In fact, it does have a lot of genuinely good stories, even if those good stories can be marred down by little bits of lazy writing in them. They are still good. Some of them are great even. Hell, some I would even go as far as say they're excellent. But despite all of that, Wild Blue Yonder, the episode we knew the least about and, at least from my perspective, had the least to be excited about, absolutely blew my expectations out of the water. Also, apologies for how late this video is. If you haven't been keeping up with my Instagram or seen my community post, I had an absolute war getting my review of the Star Beast past copyright, so I had to delay it by 2 weeks, and God knows when this video will be out. But if you ask me, using the episode's footage throughout is worth it, because it makes the video visually so much more entertaining. Now let's not waste any more time and discuss why Wild Blue Yonder is a masterpiece. So completely opposite to the Star Beast, this episode opens on England 1666, where we see Sir Isaac Newton. I don't know why Russell chose Nathaniel Curtis to play the character, since he looks nothing like him in any way whatsoever, because he's actually an attractive young man and Isaac Newton looked like this. But it doesn't really affect the story in any way, so who cares? And it's not like Curtis doesn't play the role really well with loads of charisma with the short amount of time he's on screen regardless. So the TARDIS crashes into the tree while he was discovering gravity, and the Doctor and Donna pop out, and this scene is great. The little bits of bickering and digs the two throw at each other are brilliant. And I know I said this before, but it really can't be understated how great these two chemistry is. And it's like, how have they not missed a beat in the slightest?
But don't worry, he's got a time machine, which means he can blame me for all eternity.
So they pulled the cheesiest line ever.
You can appreciate
the gravity of the situation.
And it leads to a hilarious payoff.
What was that delightful word? Mavity.
Which is a great running joke, which seemingly isn't going to be dropped anytime soon, because it was even in Ncuti's first episode. So the TARDIS crash lands in an unknown location. We see subtle bit of character growth from the Doctor, where he doesn't snap at Donna for breaking his brand new TARDIS. Not that the 10th Doctor would have lost his mind enough if it was him in this situation, but one of the key differences between 10 and 14 is that 14 is a lot more mellow, because he's been through so much more stuff and had so many different experiences since he last saw Donna. This is a nice subtle change between the characters. The great thing about getting David Tennant as the Doctor again in this way, with so much in between, is that 10 and 14 are essentially the same, but they're also very different, all in subtle ways. It makes him fascinating to watch throughout all the specials, but this episode in particular highlights that a lot. Well, I'll explain that more throughout the video. But isn't it a great little bit of foreshadowing that the TARDIS played Wild Blue Yonder, a war song, and in this episode the characters go to war essentially against themselves? A mental war? It's brilliant. And I like how here we have an example of why Donna was gonna stay with the Doctor forever, because as soon as they leave the TARDIS and know it's mending, they're both so curious and interested to see where they are that they leave the safety of being right by the TARDIS to go explore. Which later bites them in the ass.
perfectly in line for both characters to do this because they just wanted to see the universe together, as much as Donna denies having an interest in it now. It's a great way to keep this familiar dynamic fresh, but engaging as well. So they start walking towards something in the distance on a surprisingly solid green screen ship, and we get the first of these ominous shots hinting towards something else being on the ship. And this is a great way to build up immersion for the story because it adds an uneasy feeling to the setting right away, before it's even really fully established. Like, as of yet, we know nothing other than that they're on a ship. A seemingly empty ship, yet this shot implies that something sinister lies within, which is excellent for building up tension in the story right away. You're gonna hear a lot of compliments of the director in this story because Tom Kingsley did an absolutely amazing job with this episode, and he plays a key part in making it as effective as a story as it can be, and he absolutely nailed it. I really hope Russell brings him back in the future. So the two talk about Isaac Newton being hot, with the Doctor agreeing, and I do like that the 14th Doctor acknowledges his change in sexual preference compared to the 10th. Usually the Doctor is played as strictly asexual, which I think is perfect for the character, but given how expertly delivered and crafted the 10th Doctor was, there's no hiding that out of all the incarnations, he's probably the most enamored with women in a normal way. I say in a normal way because Moffat literally wrote the 11th Doctor sexually assaulting and sexualizing women way too much for comfort. But that's a topic for another day, and honestly a topic I just recommend watching this video for, because it covers the topic way better than I ever could. Anyway, I was saying, the 10th Doctor was definitely still an asexual character in his era, but he was mostly enamored with women. But 14 showing an interest in men is interesting, considering the character just came the back off being a woman as well. And, well, as Donna had put it,
Well, it was never that far from the surface, mate.
So the TARDIS flies away and they start panicking, and with the Sonic and TARDIS now being gone, it even further builds up the suspense and immersion for the story, because they are fully in an unknown place without any of the Doctor's gadgets, completely stripped down to the basics, which is great coming off the back of two eras that relied way too much on both. And even in the last story, the Sonic was way over relied on. And I also like in the scene how it highlights as the Doctor has gotten older because he's matured. He's a lot more calm and less arrogant, as even he wants to snap at Donna for getting them in this situation in the first place. He stops himself and immediately goes back to calm her down when he sees she's distressed. This point will likely be reiterated a lot in the rest of this review and my review of the Giggle, but the subtle differences between 10 and 14 do really make these episodes so interesting to watch compared to the original Golden Age. So it turns out the hostile action displacement system turned back on due to the TARDIS rebuilding. Way better reason for it to be on than the Doctor turning it back on for no reason because plot. So now we know, not only is the TARDIS gone, not only is the Sonic gone, but there's an apparent danger on the ship, and we know the characters are being watched because of these shots. It's amazing how good this episode is as hooking you in immediately, especially with such a basic setting. So they continue down the corridors and make fun of Donna's old teacher for being called Mrs. Bean, which isn't only funny, it surprisingly leads to one of the most impactful scenes in the episode later on. So we hear an alien language be spoken and the ship reforms itself around them, and we get another line that reaffirms how stupid this scene in the Star Beast is.
I thought you knew 27 million languages.
I know 57,205,000,205, but not this one.
Guys, the Star Beast isn't that good, you know. So they get in this goofy car and find out that Jimbo's a robot, which further sets up the mystery of why someone on a seemingly empty ship would set up a very primitive robot to walk very slowly down a very long corridor. I wonder. So it's revealed that they are at the very edge of the universe, and this scene excellently unsettles the audience because of how out of their depths this makes the characters feel, shadowing back to us immediately with the Doctor not knowing if he's able to get them out of there, and with there being no stars or really anything in sight in space. And the way the score rises as the Doctor further explains that there is literally nothing but darkness, that they're that far out, that not even light from billions of miles away has travelled this far. It's absolutely excellent, because it gives off such an uneasy vibe to the setting they're in, with all we know about it so far. So many questions which just make the mind race, yet no answers, with one of the most prominent questions being, what's watching them? If the ship detects no forms of life besides them, with the only activity being 3 years ago. Man, Doctor Who hasn't felt this immersive in years, and that really can't be understated. What also can't be understated is how this episode knows just when to be silent. When the already creepy and immersive score stops, and they're just silence. It really puts into perspective how far out and alone the characters are. Even further exemplified by the Doctor stating, no one has ever been this far out until they arrived. My god, this episode is great! Not many episodes manage to capture the feeling of unease, yet you can't look away like Midnight, but this episode is honestly giving it a run for its money. And the next scene also perfectly shows off this story's similarities with Midnight, with the two characters separated in rooms, both trying to fix the ship, and the other one comes in the room. And one thing this story does excellently is that you really manage to appreciate it even more on further rewatches. But the mystery is still engaging and impactful. A lot of mystery stories have the issue of only being impactful on first time viewings, making it feel a little underwhelming when you watch it again. However, this is an issue that this story doesn't suffer from in the slightest, because of how well everything is pulled off and executed, and this scene is a perfect example of that. Because the first time you watch this story, because you know there's seemingly nothing else on the ship, we just assume that these scenes take place after each other. Like the Doctor went back in to speak to Donna, then Donna went back in to speak to the Doctor. But slowly and slowly, as the scene progresses, you start to get the sense of unease again, and you realise that that wouldn't make sense, because why would either characters do that before they finish their task? And why are the characters acting like themselves but just off? Before the climactic reveal of them both saying their arms are too long, culminating in this brilliant bit of camera trickery. But because of how expertly this is pulled off, this scene is still fascinating to watch because of Tennant and Tate's performances. Even when you know this isn't actually the Doctor, and this isn't actually Donna, you get to analyse and observe their performances and really see how they play their part of the oh so familiar characters, but manage to make them seem so off and unsettling. Like, even the most subtle nuances of both their performance are so outstanding, like the way the Doctor tries to casually walk in, but it just doesn't look right, to the way he creepily just stares at her, as if he's trying to wrap his head around the words she's saying. Even if this was actually the Doctor, he obviously wouldn't act this way, especially given how expressive this Doctor is, and this cheap imitation barely can even express yet. And the way he responds as though he's just saying what he thinks she wants to hear, because he can't actually think of anything the Doctor would say. Even the way he refers to Wilf is delivered in such a sublime way.
He's lovely, Wilf. Such a nice man. I'd love to see him again.
And the reason I think this works so perfectly is because it wouldn't be impossible for the Doctor to speak this way, but because we as an audience are already so familiar with this character, and specifically this Doctor, we know that he just doesn't talk like this. And it's even further proven when he says,
"Oh, we get hungry, don't we?"
The way he's still sat, the way he's staring, the way he speaks, the things he's saying, all absolutely tremendous at hinting to the audience that something isn't quite right. And yet, even when you know, it's still so engaging and terrifying to watch. This creature tried to imitate the character that we know so well. And don't forget that this is happening in reverse as well, with the actual Doctor and the fake Donna. And Catherine Tate's performance is just as impressive as David Tennant's in this story. The way Donna robotically walks in, just stops and stands on the spot, and she flatly delivers these lines is sublime. And I mean no disrespect when I say her delivery is flat, because it's obviously very intentional, as she is perfectly adding on top this scene with this uneasy performance, as Donna is so full of life and over the top with even the most basic scenes and lines of dialogue, that seeing her act this way is a great way of showing off what these creatures are like. The blank, 1,000-yard stare as if she's observing everything he does is so great to watch unfold, and the tension rises even further when she says,
"Do you miss home, Gallifrey?"
And again, similarly to the Doctor, while it wouldn't be out of the question for Donna to say this, because we already know this character so well, we know if she was going to ask a question like this, she wouldn't word it in this way, and there would be some emotion and care in the way she would ask it. And one thing I love about the scene with the fake Donna is that it keeps up one of the 10th Doctor's character traits that made him seem so intelligent in the first place. And that was that whenever one of his companions or anyone he cared about was possessed, or a clone, or just not themselves in any way, he would immediately notice and play along until the time was right, and then show that he knew the whole time. Like in this scene, we see the second he actually starts paying full attention to Donna, and the way she doesn't react to her arm being too long, he clocks on immediately that this isn't her. And I think it speaks volumes of how well already the creatures are imitating the protagonist that he didn't just notice it from the way she walked in and spoke to him. And with our preconceived notion of this trait of the 10th Doctor, it yet again adds another massive layer of tension and immersion if we know that they're capable of almost outsmarting the smartest man in the room on their first attempt. And this notion only improves as time goes on. The fact that I managed to positively talk about this one less than 5-minute scene for so long with so much praise on top of it, further developing the characters with each thing they talk about while developing interest for the story, while establishing the threat, while still building suspense for the story and showing amazing body horror all at once, is absolute
cinema.
And we're only 25 minutes in, by the way. Always just getting started. It's amazing how a visual that looks so silly out of context is actually really creepy when applied in the right story. Because this is almost identical to the visual from that awful two-parter from Series 6, yet because that story is, well, awful, it just takes you out of that story, yet here, it's keeping you hooked in.
It was perfect. Perfect. Everything, down to the last minute details.
Yeah? What's the difference?
Presentation! So they start chasing them down the corridor, only stopping because they grow in size that big that they're blocked in a wall of flesh. Oh my god! Who let this man cook? And don't tell me this is the Davies once again managing to balance scary and funny yet again. And what better way to boost the tension and immersion even more than it's already been boosted at this point by having the characters split up to pure panic because of the ship reforming again. And unlike a lot of forced split ups in stories like this doesn't feel forced because we've seen it happen multiple times before. After some very well executed scary corridor scenes, we get yet another example of how this episode still works so masterfully on further rewatches. In this scene where the Doctor and Donna separately escape the corridors and seemingly meet up with each other, but given how they are on separate floors, it's not impossible to believe that they could be back together, given that this is an alien spaceship and it has a strange design. But also, it could be the Not Things trying to trick the characters and the audience again. And with there being two sets of both characters, we don't actually know who's who. And the reason this scene works as well as it does without being just a rehash of the first, is that the Not Things are already so much more intelligent than they were mere minutes ago, given that both interactions completely boggle the mind and keep you guessing who's who, because every character does act like the character they're meant to be. And even upon further rewatches, the masks slip so little on the fake ones that you could almost be convinced that you're remembering it wrong and it's actually the other way around. The only giveaway to the fake ones is how much more confrontational they are about being real. And the scene with the Doctor in particular acts as a way to break him down. And even from the start of this masterful scene, you get the immediate sense of unease because of how the conversation starts when Gallifrey is mentioned.
Except it's not.
Like, we know Donna, and we know she wouldn't say it in a way like this that almost seems condescending. And one of the things I love the most about this scene is that it actually manages to make the events of the Flux feel like they mattered, which is incredibly surprising considering that that awful bit of event television just came and went in less than 2 months and it was never then brought up again in any meaningful way, even though it more or less wiped out half of the universe. Yet we never got any introspection on the Doctor's mind and how this actually affected them until right now, well over a year after that clusterfuck ended. And the way David Tennant performs this scene is absolutely amazing. How you see his tough exterior break down to the point where he's almost in tears, ready to embrace Donna only for it to get stripped away from him. A rare chance of consolidarity and potential happiness stripped away from David Tennant playing Doctor Who again. Let this poor man catch a break. But it's not just the performance that makes this amazing. Finally getting that long overdue introspection in the Doctor's mind from these events is excellent. He's so hurt and tormented by what he did, even though technically it wasn't even his fault. It must be absolutely gut-wrenching to be in that position.
It destroyed half the universe because of me.
We stand here now, on the edge of creation, a creation which I devastated. So yes, I keep running, of course I do. How am I supposed to look back on that?
It wasn't your fault.
I know!
And the idea that the Doctor keeps running because he's too afraid to look back on his past is the sort of depth this character has missed. Funnily enough, since the last time David Tennant was playing the Doctor, considering that the last 3 Doctors would have awful, tragic, life-altering events happen to them, and then they would just move on immediately, or be different for a grand total of 1 episode, then revert to normal. Unlike 9 and 10, which were developed characters that changed and grew after almost every story. It's amazing how Russell has managed to make 13 years of incompetent and lazy storytelling so much more impactful just with this scene alone. And this also acts as a great setup point for the character's fate in the Giggle, with what the Doctor just explained he had to experience and suffer with every day being shown to us when he has a mental breakdown in the corridors. All of that pain and trauma throughout the revival at the forefront, and he just loses it, snapping in the process. But because of the events currently going on, he has no time to reflect on it or try to sort himself out in any way, and he just has to move on and keep running. But for how long can he keep doing it until he snaps or loses it completely? Yeah, remember in the last review when I was complaining about how poorly Russell wrote the 14th Doctor? Well, imagine my shock when he made a complete 180 and reminded us all of why he's the greatest of all time in his very next story. Russell, I really appreciate you writing the Doctor this brilliantly considering the past 3 incarnations, but never take me on a roller coaster of writing quality like this again, or I might genuinely have an aneurysm. And I haven't yet even mentioned how the fake Doctor catches himself out in his own bullshit by taking off his tie and then forgetting to keep it on the floor. And similarly to how the fake Donna tried to break down the Doctor, the fake Doctor also tries to break down Donna by preying on her insecurities. Imagine how painful it must be to have the first spark of hope in your life, the man who made you realize how special and important you really are despite what most would perceive as flaws, the man who let you see the universe and ultimately made you a better version of yourself by sharing so many experiences with him. Imagine seeing someone who's exactly identical shout at you and be so uncharacteristically horrible and say this.
Auntie Iris, Mummy and Daddy, why does he travel with someone as stupid as you?
And the body horror adds more onto this unsettling story even further. I don't know how much more I can take of this. I'm reviewing an episode of Doctor Who that is not only good, not only great, but is a genuine piece of art and is fantastic in almost every single way. It has honestly been so many years, and when I say years, I mean actual years, since I reviewed an episode of Doctor Who even remotely close to being this good. Like, I'm so out of practice of explaining why things are good without having to use it as a comparison to something shit that I've honestly been stumped at points writing this review. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if this video doesn't even do that well, because I'm so used to having to be negative that being this positive for so long without being sarcastic honestly feels like a new experience to me. Like I said in the Starbeast review, I haven't reviewed a story above a 6 out of 10 since I did Oxygen in Extremis back in 2021. And I think the only story I've ever reviewed which is above an 8 out of 10 is my End of Time review, which is over 4 years old at this point. Oh my god, we are actually so incredibly back, it is beyond insane. We aren't only back, we've returned home and set up base to the point where you'd be convinced that we'd never even left.
We are back, baby. We are fucking back. We're back. Classic. We are back.
So the characters all converge, and I like how here we see how the Doctor and Donna recognize each other over the fake ones by just knowing what each other are like as people, and how even from the start of this interaction, you can get a sense of who's who without it being too obvious by the clones just outright naming characteristics of the Doctor and Donna. You know, something that people usually wouldn't do because that's kind of weird, but here it's used to great effect because for first time viewing, it still wouldn't be out of the ordinary for the real characters to say this because of the situation they're in. Even the Doctor's explanation of people's abilities to think they're two things at once is such a great little explanation to catch out the not things, because obviously this is a concept that they just wouldn't understand. It's like how 1 minute I could be depressed and so lacking in self-confidence that I just can't do anything, and then another minute realize that I'm actually the greatest of all time and that you should all bow down to your king! It also keeps up the running theme of the specials so far, which is two things existing at the same time being able to resolve the story. Happened in the Starbeast in a shit way, has been happening brilliantly in this story so far, and even foreshadows the two Doctors beating the Toymaker in the Giggle.
Bow down to the king.
So the Doctor whips out a bag and sorts out a line for the fellas, and this scene once again highlights why the performances in this episode are so brilliant, and make the story as captivating as it is. With the not things now caught out, they revert to how they were before, knowing they can't trick the characters anymore, and the blank, expressionless stares really freak you out, seeing these husks of the characters we know, having their own appearances fight against them. It's just such an inherently interesting concept to watch, but to watch it unfold so massively just makes it all the more captivating. And it's also at this point where the ideas start brainstorming in your mind as to what these creatures even want, as the Doctor asks what they want and the Not Thing Doctor refuses to answer and just messes with them. And I think one thing this story does well is connecting so well to the Giggle, which is honestly even more of a detriment to the Starbeast. Because there's so much foreshadowing and connection to the Giggle in this story, which makes those two stories together feel like one big connected cohesive narrative. Meanwhile, the Starbeast seemingly just exists as a way to get the explanation of the Doctor and Donna travelling again together out of the way. The way the Not Thing Doctor talks about wanting to travel the universe to play their vicious games. How is this not such brilliant foreshadowing to the Toymaker coming back and being the antagonist for the next story? And the idea that these creatures are created in the darkest depths, the furthest distance away from any life, and the only thing they're able to hear from reality is the hatred and fear formed in wars. It's brilliant, because this almost makes them a man-made antagonist. Even more potential foreshadowing for the Giggle, where the Toymaker tricks humanity into destroying each other. The Not Things forming from the worst aspects of humanity, like the traits that the Toymaker brings out back in the present. Who wrote this absolute cinema, and why is he trying to give me a heart attack? After a slightly contrived turnaround, the characters are once again separated by a pane of glass. Unfortunately, this time there's no brilliant thematic parallel to my favourite story ever, but this does also work for the climax of this story. Donna then brings up the brilliant point that if the Not Things just wanted to copy them, then why are they going out of their way to scare and terrorize the characters? Which leads to the great reveal that the Not Things are fueled by thought, and the racing of the character's brain is what allows them to become more like them and take their shape, which is why they've been going out of their way to scare the characters but never try to kill them. Which is another one of the reasons why this episode is fantastic for first and multiple viewings, because the first time around it just keeps you guessing and wondering, but when you know what they're doing and why they're doing it, you get to watch all the subtle nuances of Tennant and Tate's performances as they amazingly portray these creatures, not only try to be our main leads, but you see them try to analyze them and understand them more and more throughout the story, picking at personal history and the characters' established traits just to get under their skin and annoy them and scare them, so that their brains are racing and they can assimilate quicker. I know I've said this a bunch of times, but it makes this episode so incredibly interesting to watch, which it definitely wouldn't be if the performances weren't so good. So the Doctor tries to slow down for once, and it lasts all of about 10 seconds, before the Not Things start pushing him to question everything on the ship full of questions. And after the sad reveal that the captain of the ship ejected herself 3 years ago, everything starts coming to fruition. By the way, this is the scene I referenced in my review of the Star Beast, where the Doctor correctly identifies the gender of literal, actual bones of an alien species, yet apparently was stupid enough to somehow misgender the Meep as male, even though it doesn't sound remotely like a male in any way. The Star Beast just gets worse and worse the more I think about it, to be honest. And I love how in this scene, the tension yet again rises brilliantly with the music as the Doctor starts uncontrollably brainstorming. So does the Not Thing Doctor, and we see a new side of them, almost desperate with needing to know the answers because they can't figure them out on their own. But the Doctor is accidentally feeding them ideas. And this is where the tension meets a maximum, as it's revealed that the noise we've been hearing throughout the episode with the ship reforming was actually the ship slowly becoming a bomb to wipe out the Not Things. And this is a great reveal because not only does it make perfect sense and fit this very tense story naturally, but it also makes the captain of the ship seem intelligent because she knew it was safer to kill herself and leave the Not Things to die than it was to have them fully take her form and run riot across the universe. It's just subtle things like the Doctor not being the only intelligent character in the room that gives stories like this, and the universe as a whole, a great feeling of world building, which has been sorely missed for a very, very long time now. And this is when all of that build up, all of that tension, reaches its very peak, with both characters now knowing what the robot is for. All the questions laid out for us, with the only way to stop the Not Things being to speed up the countdown and blow up the ship.
I know! But we're still on board! I know!
So for the first time in years, we get a chase sequence that actually feels tense, with great music to go along with it. And the best part being, even though this is just a chase sequence, it actually feels fair. Because the Not Things have taken so much of the Doctor and Donna, pretty much everyone is on an equal playing field here, with the audience on the edge of their seat, finally believing we're going to get a satisfying end to the Not Things, with the Doctor so close to catching his copy that your heart is practically out of your chest, until the Not Things use the one thing they have as an advantage over the characters. While they still use their shape, they can cheat and use their otherworldly abilities to their advantage when they need to, which is how they would have won here. If not for the TARDIS being an incredibly clever beast and knowing that the hostile action is about to end and coming back to save the day. Which doesn't at all feel contrived, because it makes sense that the TARDIS would come back for the Doctor if it knew that the danger he was in was about to be gone. Unlike the Not Thing Doctor suddenly deciding to use this gorilla run to outpace the Doctor and get to the robot quicker. Because let's be for real, if you could do that, to move quicker, you would just do it anyway. Especially in a life or death situation, and it's not like these things aren't intelligent villains from the beginning, and especially at this point. I mean, maybe you could infer that every time the Not Things change shape, they lose a bit of the control they have on whoever they're possessing, but to be honest, there's nothing in the story to really imply that, and I'm not about to start writing the story for the writer. Because then that would make me no better than a Moffat fan. So the Doctor serves the TARDIS over to the Donnas, and now it's time for one of the biggest stingers in the episode, where the Doctor has to pick between the two Donnas. And I think the reason this scene is so hard-hitting is the fact that it's basically an impossible decision at this point. Because the Not Things are so clever on their own now, that they're basically impossible to tell apart from the real ones when they're trying. Unlike before, they've learned and grown so much in such a short time that you can't even really tell who's meant to be who. Even on repeat watches, there is nothing to give away that this isn't really Donna and that the Doctor fucked up.
That other Donna was a 99.9% copy.
Unfortunately for me, as excellently as this is pulled off, really pulling on your emotions similarly to the scene in the Star Beast, it also suffers from the same issue of us knowing that Donna's alive and is in the next episode. But also, like I said before, my friend said he was on the edge of his seat again. Catherine Tate also, not as if she hasn't been doing it the whole episode, absolutely nails this scene, really selling Donna's terror and fear, and even when you know the outcome of the scene, it's impossible to not feel sympathy for Donna in the scene.
She's not me! I'm me! Don't leave me!
I love that this show has also reminded us that it can be subtle and not have the emotional scenes just pointed out or outright explained to us, with no words exchanged between the Doctor and Donna. They just sit in silence, reconciling in each other as the Doctor hugs Donna as an apology for almost getting her killed and having to put her through that trauma. That is how you say sorry without having the character outright say it. And I like how we get yet another hint towards the Giggle and this character's eventual fate when the Doctor reflects on saying he invoked a superstition at the edge of the universe and he's got a bad feeling about it. Foreshadowing. And then we get another classic defining scene for the 14th Doctor, very reminiscent of a lot of the scenes for the 10th Doctor, and the word I would use to describe it as simply as possible is just pain. Where the Doctor asks Donna if she knows about his life for the past 15 years, as this is something that the fake Donna had used to torment the Doctor in probably the best scene of the episode. And as simple as a scene this is, it works so effectively because we all know what the Doctor's been through, and Tennant given this brilliant, jaded and tired look as if the Doctor just needs a rest and needs to stop to just be with the ones he cares about.
But what really happened?
Oh no, don't do this.
I'm not.
You okay?
No! Stop!
I will be.
When?
1,000,000 years.
Man, can somebody just give this poor man a hug? Seriously, every little detail of the performances here captures the character's emotion so well. And even a few of the little lines further expand upon what we love so much about these two as a duo. Like Donna immediately knowing that the Doctor's waffling and asking him what really happens, to the Doctor saying he'd be better in 1,000,000 years, and Donna initially thinking it's a joke until she sees the Doctor's expression, unchanging and unmoved. So she gives more of a reconciling? You know what I mean. She gives a very caring look. Subtle nuances like this go a long way in keeping the audience invested in the story, and I really hope Russell manages to keep this level of writing quality up for series 14 and 15. And then we get the scene in this episode that actually made me cry when watching it. Yeah, I'm being dead ass here. Despite me being a grumpy, heartless, apparently sexist old man, this scene of finally, after all of these years without, seeing Wilfred Mott, and not only seeing him, but seeing him happy again, it made us cry. The look on his face when he sees the Doctor again, absolutely beaming and almost crying with joy, fucking made me cry with joy. I didn't even know I could cry anymore, it's been so damn long, especially over a piece of fiction. And the Doctor mirroring his excitement makes it all the more better. But seeing one of the most lovable, caring, and straight up magical characters in all of Doctor Who so happy again after all these years is just such a beautiful way to cap off this episode. And knowing that they filmed this scene 2 months before Bernard Cribbins tragically passed away makes it all the more heartbreaking. Rest in peace, Bernard Cribbins. You're already missed more than you can possibly imagine. So, that was Wild Blue Yonder, and do I honestly even need to say anything else about this story at this point? This episode is just absolutely superb through and through. Seriously, Almost every single aspect of this episode is incredible. For such a simple body double base under siege story, this episode takes both of these well-known concepts and puts the bar so ridiculously high up throughout, by continuing to impress more and more throughout the story. Almost every single line of dialogue is fantastic. It all feels so natural and fit into the characters, which is even better and more impressive since this story is based on the concept of the characters basically having to fight themselves to remain. The way this episode takes the characters on a journey while also building on things we already know about them is fucking brilliant, pushing them both to their very limit and challenging them in a way that almost breaks them down. And in one case, it does successfully break them down. And on the note of a breakdown, I'd be remiss if I didn't once again mention how utterly Oscar-worthy both performances in this episode are. Considering that most of the runtime for this story is made up of 2 actors, but 4 characters, it's impossible to not give massive props to both David Tennant and Catherine Tate for absolutely nailing it in this episode. Way more than they usually do, and that's already a really high standard to surpass. But giving the actors the chance to play an evil version of themselves is so fascinating to watch unfold. Watching these 2 characters that we know and love so well trying to be themselves while also being conniving little creatures is phenomenal. From anger and bitterness, to spite and rage, to melancholic and dejected, to straight up menacing and evil. David Tennant and Catherine Tate absolutely cemented themselves in history with this episode and the performances they give, because it's without a doubt some of the best acting this show has ever seen. And I know that sounds like a hyperbolic statement, but also consider some of the performances these 2 have given in the past, especially David Tennant. While this episode is inherently simple in concept, there's absolutely nothing wrong with a simple concept when it's executed so brilliantly, and with such amazing character work, bits of world building and progressing the narrative throughout. I can, without a shadow of a doubt, say that this is the best episode of Doctor Who in a very, very long time. Honestly, not to neglect the Moffat era, because as much as I do shit on it, there is good stories, even if they are few and far between, but this episode literally solos every single story after the end of Time Part 2. I'm dead serious, because besides a very few exceptional episodes here and there, nothing after the end of Time and before Wild Blue Yonder even comes close to this episode's quality. And I just think that speaks volumes for the treat we're gonna be in for watching Ncuti Gatwa play Doctor Who. That being said, the next episode after this is The Giggle, which is... Well, here we are. The Giggle. The last episode with the brilliant 14th Doctor and Donna, and the final episode in this trilogy of 60th anniversary specials. And I'm not gonna lie, this episode is the one I'm the most interested to review. Not because I think it's good, and not because I think it's bad, but because I genuinely don't know what to make out of it even now, as this is being written 3 months after the episode came out. As context for all of you watching, I watched all of the specials twice before starting writing the review for them, and second time when my steelbook of the specials arrived. And when I watched the Starbies for the first time, I was pretty pleased with it. I'd seen and picked up on a lot of issues that the story has, but overall I enjoyed it, and even upon my rewatch I enjoyed it, even if significantly less. When I first watched Wild Blue Yonder, I was absolutely blown away. And on my rewatch, I was still really impressed with it. But when I first watched The Giggle, I watched it with 2 of my best friends, one of which is a lifelong Doctor Who fan like myself, and the other who hadn't seen the show before, but she wanted to watch it with us anyway. And when I first watched The Giggle, I was really happy with it, and I did enjoy it, but I didn't think it was good. You can probably guess as to why. And even when I watched it again, I thought it was good, but also very, very heavily marred. So this review is going to be the most interesting for me to write because I don't even really know whether this episode is good or bad. But one thing I am certain of is that it's still way better than the Star Beast, as that story just gets worse and worse the more you think about it. And Wild Blue Yonder being so linked to this story and setting it up in such a natural way really didn't do it any favours. Also, apologies for how late this video is, but since my birthday, which the Wild Blue Yonder review came out 2 days after, I basically haven't had a day off. Pretty much every single day for the past 2, but probably 3 months by the time this video's out, I've either been at work, and if I haven't been at work, I've been out for someone else, and I haven't had a single day off to myself. So I've had literally no time to make this video. So little time, in fact, that despite essentially giving myself 5 months to make 3 videos because I wanted these reviews out before the new series started, I didn't even manage to achieve that goal, since the first 2 episodes of Series 14, or whatever you want to call it, are already out. And at the time of this being recorded, the series is halfway over.
What? It's blank? Are you kidding me? Not again.
I also filmed this video directly after filming this audio, so you might want to watch that if you want to see some early thoughts. But let's not dilly-daddle and dawdle anymore, because we all deep down know my intros kinda suck, and let's review The Giggle. So similarly to Wild Blue Yonder, this episode opens in the past, in Soho 1925, and right off the bat I have to praise the presentation of the toy maker throughout this story. Neil Patrick Harris was the most perfect actor to cast for this role, and he plays him amazingly throughout, with tons of charm and charisma, and he just has such a great aura throughout this episode and is honestly really scene-stealing throughout, which is especially impressive for anyone to do when sharing screen time with 2 of the greatest to ever do it. And even his absolutely horrific German accent plays into a part of this character that I do like, and that I was quite surprised the story acknowledged, and even more surprised that Russell didn't just brush it off, considering the connotations. For those of you who don't know, the Celestial Toymaker in the original story, and the story as a whole, is low-key kinda racist. For starters, the word celestial can be used as a derogatory way to refer to someone with Chinese descent, and considering the more commonly known definition of the word, that's pretty mad to say the least. And considering this was in the 60s, the word was definitely meant to be used in that derogatory context. It also doesn't make the story look any better that the toy maker was a white man who was dressed like this. And I do really like and think it's quite brave to keep the idea that this character is racist intact for this story, to even further amplify how evil he is and how much disregard he has for humanity, to still have such a trait in current year. I thought it was brave for Russell to present the Master as sexist in the late 2000s, but to have a racist character as a villain in the 2020s? You just gotta respect the balls it takes to do that. At least this time it was intentional.
I really must apologize for the rain. You must be used to sunnier climes.
Unlike the original story, which is that tone-deaf and dated, it features the character of Doctor Who saying the N-word.
What? What?
Yes, that did actually happen, and no, I will not play it. You can find it out with a simple Google search. Context tangent aside, I do think that the Toymaker's accent does play a good part in this story, as because it's so goofy and over the top, it makes him all the more intimidating when that mask slips, and we hear his real voice when he's being serious or threatening.
I cut it off the head of a beautiful lady. She will not miss it, but then she will never miss anything ever again.
He's just so good already, man. Immediately setting up an intimidating presence with this horrific implication, while still hamming up his accent, showing that he wouldn't even take what he did seriously in the slightest. This is the first time in years I get to say we're off to a great start, and we actually are. So we see the first image of television invented, and with the retroactive perspective that the toy maker was directly involved with this, and how we saw the last episode end, we all know what we seen must have been caused by him, especially with his distinct laugh playing us into the title sequence. I don't know how many times I can say we're so incredibly back before it loses all meaning, but hell man, can you blame us? This episode manages to hook you in after the last one so incredibly well in just under 5 minutes. Speaking of the last one, we pick up where we left off, with the Doctor and Donna in present-day Earth seeing chaos ensue, with what the world would look like if everyone thought they were right and wouldn't change their mind. As someone who has worked in retail for the past 3 years, serving the general public, I can safely say that I found this setting incredible, and honestly seriously scarily accurate. No, don't tell me what I can and can't do at my job. I'm the one who actually works here, and know what I'm doing. No, you can't have an exception to a rule because someone did it before. I'm not them. While the guy willing to let himself get hit by a car might seem a bit over the top, I have honestly had people use rationale this stupid against me before. So honestly, this isn't even out of the question to happen. So Unit arrived to pick up the Doctor and Donna to bring them to the beautiful Unit headquarters, and after some painfully upsetting reused lines from Wilf,
You go with the doctor! Don't listen to her! You go with the doctor! You go with the doctor!
Shirley the Goat returns, and once again we get the return of
Kate Lethbridge Stewart!
Now, I'm not gonna lie, complete transparency here, I do not remember for the life of me if Kate was any good in the Chibnall era. As far as I remember, he used her fine, but she didn't really do much. But I can gladly say that she was used in this episode pretty well. She's always been a great supporting character, and it's good to see that she's still being used well in Series 14. And she points out what makes this episode's concept so far so inherently interesting, as this is essentially all of humanity lashing out, and you can't really combat that. And I think this scene does explore the possibilities well. As, of course, if everyone is being violent and lashing out, they aren't going to listen to Unit, especially if they're trying to stop everyone from feeling the way they do, with that feeling being entitlement. It can't really be combated. Do you have any idea how many entitled people I've met in my life? You can't reason with them. Even on a smaller scale, have you ever tried to convince people that they're wrong on something before? Because I have, in a professional and personal way, and at least in the professional way I've done it. You should see the amount of whining and crying you receive even for just pointing it out. Not even directly to a person, just pointing it out. Also, this is something I've been meaning to bring up since the Starbeast review, but I honestly don't know how I feel about Unit being so out in the open and known to the world. I feel like it honestly loses a lot of its charm when it is essentially the Hooniverse equivalent of the Avengers Tower. Because the point of Unit was supposed to be this secret organization set up to stop alien threats with occasional assist from the Doctor. Now, obviously this point was lost a long time ago, since New Who does so many world-ending threats that can't really be covered up in a natural way. But at least in the Moffat era, I cannot believe I'm about to use the Moffat era as a good example, but at least in the Moffat era, the headquarters was still a secret and not just smack bang in the middle of the city. Now obviously times change and Unit couldn't stay a secret forever, but don't you think that it being in the middle of the city, in this huge tower, that people would just start to question it more and more? Like, where do they get all the money from? How do they deal with these alien threats so well? Maybe they have a person who often helps them deal with alien threats, and maybe that person himself is an alien, since they seemingly all go by the same alias yet always look different. My point being that while I don't inherently have an issue with Unit not being a secret anymore, I really think that it could lead to the eventual implication that everyone, at least in the UK, knows who the Doctor is, which would really go against the purpose of this character. It's like how in the Moffat era,
well, I was gonna say essentially implied, but it basically outright told us that every single Earth leader, prime ministers, presidents, knew who the Doctor was. That's more like an example of Moffat era writing. Also, as we go into Unit, we're reintroduced to Mel Bush. The 7th Doctor's companion, who, unfortunately for Bonnie Langford and us watching, was written absolutely awfully in the 80s. But thankfully, from her few scenes in this episode, she gets to show us a much more enjoyable side of the character. And I'm glad that similarly to what he did with Sarah Jane, Russell has removed all of the poor elements of her character and has completely reformed her into a much, much better character. Now obviously Mel's upgrade isn't as good as Sarah Jane's, but similarly to Kate, her presence in this episode is felt and she's a good addition, and she complements every scene she's in quite well. And this most likely isn't the last time we've seen her, so I'm glad she was reintroduced in such a natural and fitting way. Okay, while editing this, I was reminded, but I completely forgot that Mel made a cameo in Power of the Doctor. So this isn't really much of a reintroduction as much as it is a repurpose, but we move.
What do I care? I mean, seriously. Why should I care about you?
No change there, then.
Based! So we get an example from Kate of what the effects of the self-indulgence are. Bit strange that the head of Unit is the one doing this, and no one tries to stop her, but I actually do really like this scene, as it highlights the deepest, darkest aspects of her character that have been hidden away for a long time, and I think that subconsciously Kate not trusting the Doctor is a really interesting bit of extra depth that her character has needed for quite a while. Because of course she should have deep-seated doubts about the Doctor. As helpful and amazing as he is and can be, at the end of the day, he does just disappear, usually without warning or hesitation, and undoubtedly she would have heard this from her dad from a very early age, who had to deal with it way longer than she did. And especially since the Doctor's personality can change significantly when he regenerates, and not long before this, the last time we seen Kate, the Doctor was a woman. How could you not have deep seeds of doubt, even if they are at the very, very back of your mind? Even the roasting of the gingers and Shirley was very well done. Well, I say it's well done for Shirley, that being in the back of Kate's mind is actually kind of mad. Unfortunately, it was at this exact moment during my rewatch for this review it dawned on me what was really going on. So, obviously we could sort of already clock on this was the Toymaker's doing, because it was completely obvious and we were outright showing. But when it's fully revealed that he implanted this sort of hypnosis on every single person on planet Earth by using the first image of television that is on every screen, and it manipulated people into acting like this, that... all of this is starting to sound very familiar. Awfully familiar, in fact. Awfully familiar to the point where if you really think about it, this is just an extension on the already existing story beats from the Series 3 finale. A crazy person played by an amazing actor who steals every scene he's in, looking for power and control, doing so in a way which mostly entertains themselves, yet the Doctor is emotionally impacted by it on a personal level. This is literally just the sound of drums. Imagine my shock having spent so much time complaining about Chibnall and Moffat just trying their best to rip off Russell T Davies in series 12 and 13, and so many of Moffat's series and episodes, only for Russell to come back and rip off his own work.
We've checked and double-checked. It's not like the old Archangel network.
Really? Wow.
And to make this even worse, we get this absolutely brilliant scene of the Doctor shunning the Union soldiers along with essentially the whole human race, which I think not only perfectly highlights the Doctor's views on humanity when they use their brilliance incorrectly.
Don't go thinking you've got an excuse. The human race might be clever and bright and brilliant. It's also savage and venal. All the anger out there on the street, the lies, the righteousness, that's human, that's you. That's who you are, using your intelligence to be stupid.
But it's also very in line with the 10th Doctor's character. But after this, it's established that destroying the satellite would break the connection, yet would have international consequences, as Kate says, which is why they haven't done it yet. Yet even after the satellite is destroyed, we are never shown this happen in the rest of the episode. And after a funny scene with Donna and Kate, this entire plot point is completely dropped and never brought up again.
Huh? I don't understand.
Okay, I'm sorry, but what in the actual name of all that's wholly insane with this world was even the point of this plot point being in the episode? We spend practically the first 20 minutes of this story on this, yet overall it was pretty much just a waste of time that had practically no consequences, and is in a very similar vein to the Star Beast. And in case we weren't clear on that yet, that is not a good thing, in which we are shown what devastations this causes, but it doesn't really feel like it has any impact to the story or universe. Like, this episode could have showed us how this change directly affected pre-established characters, and it does show us how it affects people on the streets, for literally less than 2 minutes. While none of this part of the story is inherently bad, even if it is a blatant rip-off of the sound of drums, it's overall kinda just a waste of time that doesn't even really play that much of a key part into the narrative, and is ultimately just a bit pointless. Like, if you really wanted to include this part in the story, it so obviously needed so much more time to develop and actually needed to be resolved in a satisfying way, instead of half-baking this really interesting idea of the Toymaker bringing out all of humanity's worst aspects to fight against themselves, and then not really do anything with it. And considering the first 20 minutes of this episode is pretty much pointless, it then begs the question as to why it was included over scenes and explanations that this episode desperately needed, yet didn't have. Yeah, because establishing a plot point, then not using it, was clearly so much better of a use of everyone's time than actually making the law-bending rules this episode introduces actually make sense. Also, I just thought, if Kay is offering up... Oh, fuck, my voice is gone. No, wait, hold up. Wait a minute.
So much later that the old narrator got tired of waiting, and they had to hire a new one.
After a sudden nosebleed, I've been resurrected. Also, I just thought, if Kate is offering up a position to Donna, then why isn't Donna bringing up the coverage of the price they would give her for a house?
And UNIT have a great insurance policy. Damage to property in the course of an alien war.
Bear in mind that this happened only a couple of hours ago for Donna, so why this still isn't on the top of her head remains a mystery to me. I don't know if any of you have priced houses recently, but Christ, if I was her, this would not left my mind for a second. Also, I know no one probably remembers this, and I didn't even question it until I did some digging, but genuinely, how did Mel get here? As far as I remember, which very well could be wrong because I didn't rewatch the classic Who story because I might be somewhat dedicated to making content, but don't be ridiculous. But I swear, Mel, when she left the Doctor, was in the future. The very, very, very far, very, very, very distant future. How the hell did she time travel back to modern day Earth and just so happened to age the exact same way that Bonnie Langford did in real life? While undoubtedly she has aged impeccably well, she then also says this.
Good old Sabalon Blitz, he lived till he was 101.
What?
101! Now, while I couldn't find an exact age for Glitz, let's assume he's the same age as the actor Tony Selby, and he's 49 at the time of Dragonfire. Are you seriously trying to tell me that Mel spent 52 years with him and then miraculously got back to Earth, yet looks like this? That is absolute fucking hog's troll, mate, and you know it. Bonnie Langford would have only been around 57 when this episode was filmed, but if we go by what the show is telling us, Mel would have to be at least 72 or 74 by the time Glitz had died, because Mel was only around 20 or 22 when she appeared in Doctor Who. I don't know exactly, because I'm assuming Big Finish probably, like, fucked with it or something, so she met him earlier. Oh wait, no, that happens in Trial. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. The point being that this makes no sense. Name 5 people who are in their 70s but look and can move around this well. You can't! And back on the topic of how she got back to Earth, how did she exactly?
So I got a lift off a Zingo and came back to Earth.
What's the Zingo?
It's the thing you get a lift off.
How? How? How?
Okay, so this Zingo thing that you can apparently get lifts off not only de-aged Mel by about 15 years, but it can also travel in time. That doesn't make any goddamn sense! Like, if she wasn't in the future, just saying this would have been a fine enough explanation on its own. But it's the fact that she was in the future, and her ages obviously don't align, that make Mel even being here a bit of a plot hole. Which is a shame, as, like I said before, she's way better now than she was in the 80s. But her presence of even being here makes no damn sense. I think I'm starting to pick up on why I've been so unsure about this episode for so long. And so far, it's because shit is just sort of happening without rhyme or reason, and it just sort of falls into place. But that place is built on a mountain of lies and nonsense. So the Doctor and Donna travel back in time to see when Stooky Bill was televised, and we then get the aspect of this episode that I actually do really like. And that's the idea that the Doctor is running himself thin and just sort of needs to retire. And this is yet another time where I'm going to have to over-compliment David Tennant's performance, because he absolutely kills it in scenes like this. The Doctor's want and need to move on from this discussion and just brush it off as normal and continues what he's doing, something that this character is infamous for doing. In this scene, we see him actually consider what Donna's saying when she says she was inside his mind. And if we think back to the best episode of Doctor Who since the end of time, we'll remember one thing that hurt the Doctor the most in this story was when the not thing Donna brought up his past and how he keeps running, and we see how hurt he was, not only by hearing all of his trauma brought back to him, but realizing that, at least in his mind, he can never truly be consoled by someone, as they'll never truly understand what he's been through unless they were told. And obviously the Doctor, being the Doctor, would never consider that he needs help and time to heal himself. We've seen from the very beginning of these specials since Donna got her memory back that he's been brushing off saying what he's done in the past, because 90% of it is just trauma. Harken back to the good old days when it would take the companions an effort to get anything like this out of the Doctor. But with Donna and the Doctor already knowing each other, obviously she already knows how to touch his heart, which is just so good. And you can tell when Donna says that he's been staggering along, that he knows she's right, but he just can't admit it to himself yet, and it's absolutely superb. I don't know how many times I can say this, but this is yet another detriment to the Star Beast, because while Wild Blue Yonder sets up this plot point brilliantly, the Star Beast does absolutely nothing with this idea, even though it clearly had the opportunity to. And similarly to this episode, you can just cut aspects of that story out to focus on the more important parts. But nah, plot points that go nowhere and scenes discussing pronouns of an alien that he should know anyway are clearly so much more important. And while the setup in Wild Blue Yonder is fantastic, because that is only a 1-hour episode, which doesn't even really entirely focus on that, it makes this change in the Doctor's character seem a bit sudden. It's a very double-edged situation here, because while yes, this is fantastic, we should have had so much more build-up to this over the specials. The most interesting line in the trailers to me was when the Doctor says, "I don't know who I am anymore." But yet, the Star Beast not focusing more on the Doctor's identity crisis, and instead being the mess that it was, has really dampened the effect that this brilliant scene is going for, which is a huge shame. Because as much as I can, and probably will most likely be slagging this episode off for God knows how much longer,
Oh my goodness!
the one thing this episode has going for it consistently is this story beat, which really does have to work overtime because of all the shit it's crammed in between. So the Doctor and Donna meet the Toymaker, and after he makes fun of the Doctor for having no balls, the story completely forgets how to be subtle for a minute.
Donna, go back to the TARDIS. Go back to the TARDIS.
You never tell me to do that.
Wow. Really? I wonder if everyone on planet fucking Earth already knows that! Seriously, it's just little things like this that really dampen the effect of scenes because of how much more effective this would be if we just had Donna giving a shocked and worried expression, that the Doctor would even ask her to do this, as opposed to just outright spelling out why this is a surprising thing for him to say. It's stuff like this that really makes me miss the RTD era. Wait. This is the RTD era. Oh dear.
Be careful what you wish for, punk.
No! Neil Patrick Harris, however, completely steals the show here once again, and like I was bringing up before, him suddenly speaking in his normal voice very well highlights to me why his goofy accent plays such a key part in this performance. Because while it is completely unserious, it shows us how he just doesn't take anything that's going on seriously, yet whenever he does and he talks normally, he's very intimidating because you can tell he's actually locking in and he's taking it seriously. And for such an over-the-top character, this works masterfully at making them intimidating. This episode really isn't straying far from those Series 3 parallels, is it? After the Toymaker runs away, we get this really interesting sequence in which the Doctor and Donna walk around these never-ending corridors, which I must admit is a very well done scene. It's very well edited and shot and directed brilliantly throughout, really exemplifying the creepy tone this story is going for, and it ups the threat and tension excellently. Especially with the Doctor saying that the TARDIS is an idea that the Toymaker would just throw away, and we're in his domain, where it's governed by the rules of play. The idea alone that the TARDIS, one of the most impressive and dynamic ships in all of fiction, just doesn't even faze the Toymaker, is excellent. Really selling us on how powerful and omnipotent he is. Shame we couldn't have been shown more of this instead of just wasting time for the first 20 minutes of this episode, but whatever. Then the carrying aspect of this episode comes back once more with this absolutely superb scene of the Doctor essentially being riled up with guilt to the point of depression. You already know this exchange is going to be masterfully done when before it even properly starts you see the Doctor dreading to even answer Donna's question, because this is, yet again, the Doctor's past catching up with him. Something brought up before by Donna, but now he has to actively confront it here, and it's brilliant. Made all the more better by the revelation that the Toymaker, even being here, is completely the Doctor's fault. Remember when in Wild Blue Yonder he invoked a superstition at the edge of the universe and he was very sort of like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Yeah, that wasn't just a cheap trick he pulled out. It had direct consequences, and here they are now. This excellently plays into the notion that the Doctor is wearing himself out. He only has so many tricks and ideas, but they can't work forever, and this is here to prove that. And you can really tell he's wearing himself out by how snappy and pessimistic he is with Donna, unsure whether he can even save her from this, which is just cinema. I feel like we haven't seen this side of the Doctor in so long, and it is really shining here, as this is the sort of depth that was so absent from the 13th Doctor, and made her just so boring and dull to watch. Because of course you'd be overridden with guilt for causing humanity to fall in on itself when you just didn't need to. You were just trying to be clever. And all of that stuff 11, 12, and 13 caused to happen must be riding very high on his conscience now, having not only his past and Donna back in the picture, but also Mel and Kate, which further leads into an exceptional scene with the Toymaker later, but we'll get to that soon enough.
Maybe I'll save you. You big idiot.
The foreshadowing for the Doctor's fate has been so good in these last two stories, man. This is the type of sauce that this show has really been missing, and not the type of subtlety that Series 14 has been having so far.
The one who waits is almost here!
don't worry, the 60th is not exempt from this either.
Just wait till I tell the boss.
My legions are coming.
Alright, I get it!
Back on topic for a second, and I must say that Donna and the Doctor's relationship being pre-established really does help this story a lot, because we already know how well these two do at supporting each other, so scenes like this work all the more effectively given the two's relationship already. This just adds even more onto it, even if it is 15 years later. After a very inevitable split up, we get shown these two fascinating moments set up by the toy maker. And this scene with the Doctor in particular is so well done. The idea that the toy maker's laugh wouldn't leave the man from the beginning's head, driving him crazy enough to the point where he goes back, only to be tricked into a game, and then have his entire body except his head turned into a puppet. That's absolutely wild. Great creativity and horror aspects here. And it gets even better when the toy maker starts mocking the Doctor for leading him into reality.
I thought I was clever.
No wonder the Doctor deep down knows he wants to stop. This must be absolutely horrific outright, and then get mocked for it as well. Absolutely ruthless. And this continues with Donna when she gets attacked by these eerie Scottish dolls, which are just... ugh. These scenes work brilliantly at further setting up the toy maker's danger and power he has, that he's able to just torment the characters in such an effective way. Also, the Stooky Babas were actually set up earlier in the episode, which does make this scene in particular great on rewatch.
But you leave the family all alone. Poor Stooky Sue and the poor Stooky Babbies. You would leave them without Papa.
That's what I'm talking about! That's why he's the MVP!
And I warn you now, if this is a trick, I will kill you.
Hello, Stooky. My name's Donna. Now I think that you're a goner. Anything to add?
No, she's actually the best, man. I've missed her presence so much in this show. Oh my god. It's just little scenes like this being carried on their own purely by reaction. Oh, they're just priceless. I really do hope that one day we get another companion that's this well written and performed, and cast so perfectly. So the two reunite and the excellence continues as the toy maker then decides to mock the Doctor further by taunting him about all of his recent companion departures and misdeeds. And I think the biggest stinger from this is that we've seen the Doctor avoid talking about this in every story so far because of how much it's been haunting him.
Why is it one last trip? Because you could visit. We could do outrageous things like have tea. Point is, you've been given a second chance. You can do things different this time. So why don't you do something completely new and have some friends?
Yeah.
Where have you been since I last saw you?
You know, the usual. Robots chases waterfalls.
Ah, okay. But what really happened?
A lot.
And the toy maker directs all of this at Donna, then repeatedly mocks the Doctor for how he tries to justify this stuff in his mind at the time. And the aspect that I do like about this on a meta level is that Russell is low-key taking the piss out of Moffat for trying to have his cake and eat it too with how he wrote out all of his companions. Because Moffat was such a heavy proprietor of the writing style of style over substance dog shit, they would always have these massive events that you'd think would affect the character in a deep and meaningful way like we'd seen before, but they were either ignored completely or brushed off after like one story. Same applies with the Flux. While on the surface level the 10th Doctor may same the seam in every series, if you really pay attention you notice how every departure and major event in his life plays a key part in how he would act in the series. After losing Rosie becomes much more dark and distant, trying not to form attachments, and he treats Martha poorly in the first half of the series because of it. After learning and growing from the mistakes he made with Martha, when Donna came back he reassured that he only needed a friend. And he was way less dark in this series because Donna was such a good balance for him, and could bring him back down. Something she did on the very first day she met him. But after the awful Series 4 finale, the Doctor loses everyone and goes off on the deep end. Way more defeatist and prone to making mistakes, and despite trying to mask it, he's obviously miserable and is afraid of losing the one thing he has left. His own life, which he ends up losing not long after anyway. But then we go to 11,
And when he loses the pond, he's down and depressed for one half of the snowmen, not even the full episode. Then he's back to normal, even though his normal at this point was an insufferable caricature. And then when 12 loses Clara, we get one of the best 12th Doctor episodes ever, immediately followed by one of the worst episodes of Doctor Who ever. So that was great. And then when he loses Bill and Nardole, he doesn't have the time to grieve or anything because he's too busy fucking around with the first Doctor. But the key point in all of those examples is despite all of the characters dying, they actually don't. The Doctor just never sees them again because plot. And despite 13 having the worst, most horrible act of genocide essentially caused because of her, she just doesn't even really seem to be upset by it. Which is again what made this scene in Wild Blue Yonder so damn good.
It destroyed half the universe because of me. We stand here now, on the edge of creation, a creation which I devastated. So yes, I keep running, of course I do. How am I supposed to look back on that?
It wasn't your fault.
I know!
And the truly brilliant thing about this scene is how it once again morally reprimands the Doctor for trying to justify all of these events, despite them all technically being his fault, which the errors themselves so rarely did because they were too scared to make the Doctor come off as a bad person. Because the one time they did, people complained about it too much, despite it being the best iteration of the Doctor Moffat ever wrote.
I think he's probably her uncle, but they made that up to pass the time while they were talking. This is Clara, not my assistant. She's some other word.
I'm his carer.
Yeah, my carer. She can, so I don't have to.
And the cherry on top of all of this is that this whole scene is presented by the Toymaker hamming it up only to seriously snap back to his real persona to make the Doctor feel even worse about himself, while also creatively showing off all of these events with even more puppets to keep up the creepy tone the last 10 minutes of the story has had. Man, if the whole episode was like this, you wouldn't have had to listen to me complain for 20 minutes of the review already. I also think it's extremely poignant that the Doctor finally snaps to challenge the Toymaker to a game when Donna asks him if any of this is true. Because it shows off an aspect of this character that I do quite like, and that's that he tries to hide his past from his companions because it's his burden to bear. At least now, finally, these are being acknowledged as his mistakes, and he doesn't want anyone else to know that he caused all of this to happen. Especially someone who he cares about. He doesn't even want them to think about his burden because then they'd worry about him, which is something this character has avoided for so long. As easy as it would be, and honestly is easy, to just ignore all of the incarnations of the Doctor that precede David Tennant, I'm really glad that 14 does exist, because it seems like this one, and the one in Wild Blue Yonder, that finally add weight and consequences to a lot of the stuff from the previous two eras. While you can look at 10 and 14 as just a continuation of David Tennant being Doctor Who, 14's story is also massively benefited from 11, 12, and 13. Which is really surprising because if we don't beat around the bush here, they're all pretty shit Doctors, despite great moments they can have.
Finally, some good fucking food.
So they play a really lame game of pick up the bigger number card. Alright. And we get loads of brilliant lines of build-up and world-building from the Toymaker, which, I can't lie, I am very conflicted on. On one hand, a lot of these things can and most likely will build up to a lot of cool stuff that's in the future, with a lot of cool implications and ideas. But on the other hand, because we don't have an answer for any of this yet, a lot of this dialogue can leave a lot to be desired, to say the least.
I made a jigsaw out of your history. Did you like it?
What the fuck is that supposed to mean? Is this implying that the Timeless Child was the Toymaker's doing? Well, feasibly, yes, he could fuck with someone's origin. That's such an open-ended thing to say that it leaves a lot more questions than answers. Like, how did he do that? Why did he do that? Hasn't he only been back in existence for like 2 days? How did he have time to do that? Why would he change the entire origins of the Time Lords just to make a group of them a bunch of useless donuts that tortured a random child for its power? And most importantly, why does the Doctor not question any of this? And it gets even worse.
The master was dying and begged for his life with one final game. And when he lost, I sealed him for all eternity inside my gold tooth.
You know, I hate to do this because I think this entire era is an affront to not only Doctor Who, but just entertainment and fiction as a whole. But how the fuck did the Master manage to survive this bullshit again? When the Master inevitably returns again, considering this is Russell, he might at least attempt to explain it. But here, with there being practically nothing to go off, I just have to reinforce that we have literally just watched the Master die 3 episodes ago! What? Did he just lie there like that for comedic effect? Then somehow be fit enough to accept a game from the Toymaker, who knew who he was, and where he was? How exactly? I don't know, plot. I know this is just gonna be, oh, Richard reviews glazing the RTD era again, but I do seriously wish that the Master just stayed dead after the end of time, because this character's legacy has been destroyed so much in the last decade, it's insane. We will never get anything as meaningful for the character as this again.
Get out of the way.
You'll die with me, Doctor!
I know. Get out of the way.
You did this to me! All of my life! You made me!
Also, we have now seen the Master die 3 times definitively in New Who, and they're baiting bringing him back again. Also, the Toymaker teases more for the one who waits. This just doesn't really do much for me because, again, this style of storytelling is so played out in New Who at this point that I don't really care about just the lines on their own. The thought of there being a creature more powerful than the Toymaker is fascinating. I just wish this information was delivered to us in a much more interesting way.
That's the game of the 21st century. They shout, and they type, and they cancel.
Alright, buddy. I also think it's pretty strange how this scene here reinforces how the one thing the Toymaker can't do is cheat a game to win. Yet, this doesn't play any part into the narrative in defeating the Toymaker or anything, really. Even though when you look at how this story was actually resolved, it really easily could have, but we'll get to that eventually. So the Doctor loses and challenges the Toymaker to the best of 3, and they go back to the present. We then get the waste of the first 20 minutes of this story's promise, and the Doctor warns Unit about the Toymaker. And then, we get this absolutely amazing scene where the Toymaker does a full dance show to spice up your life by the Spice Girls, and oh my god, this scene is truly phenomenal. Exceptional even. Not only is this extremely entertaining and funny, but it still reinforces how much of an omnipotent power the Toymaker is when he turns bullets into flowers and some soldiers into just bouncy balls just by touching them. Honestly, this is just a brilliant scene, even further amplified by all of the characters' reactions. However, unfortunately, as brilliant as this scene is, I can't help but think this is yet again something that I've seen before in the Series 3 finale. Like, these characters alone are already extremely similar, but given the Toymaker a dance sequence before a major event in the episode as well, come on, man.
What's that supposed to mean?
I found this way too funny for absolutely no reason. So after the Toymaker sang Scissor Sisters, he went to the Galvanic Beam, and this scene is brilliant. All of the dialogue exchange here is excellent, with some really standout lines and delivery, amplifying the threat and tone of the story very well.
Your fight is with me!
You know full well this is merely a face concealing a vastness that will never cease, because your good and your bad are nothing to me.
Where are my staff? The beam had a pilot and the armorer and the ground staff. Where are they?
I think they're still falling.
Get back inside!
And I said 9! All that exists is to win or to lose.
The Doctor then does what I full well wanted him to do in the Star Beast because it would have helped this angle, and that's try to reason with the Toymaker but fail due to ultimately showing the Toymaker all of Earth. While this isn't exactly what I'd asked for in the original Star Beast review, you can at least see how the Toymaker would be more likely to accept the Doctor's offer had the Doctor not shown him to Earth. And the Toymaker's monologue here is fucking sublime until Russell T Davies, that absolute, sick, twisted, cruel bastard, does it again. He makes me watch as I lose my hero and he becomes someone else. And I've got to point out how well done this is. David Tennant's performance here, not as if you haven't heard me say this 100,000 times already, is fucking incredible. Really selling you on the idea of the Doctor's sadness of losing his life this early, but also a distinct difference here is that he's ready to accept it and move on. Something the 10th Doctor was so afraid of doing because he wanted that settled down life, but just having it stripped away from him too much led him to just run away. But 14, seemingly in this story, is the opposite. He's more scared of settling down than he is running away. And I think one of the key reasons for this is that the Doctor this time gets to die with his companions by his side, with Donna bravely proclaiming that he won't die alone, because she already knows he's had to suffer through that already. Murray Gold also really shines here with this beautiful score, swelling and shining, and all the tears are being held back until...
Here we go again.
Huh? What? What in what the what? Huh? Excuse me? Can you, huh? How the fuck did you do that?
What the fuck, dude?
Okay, so yeah, it's time to finally address the elephant in the room with this episode. That being this scene where the Doctor splits in two, and it's dubbed by generation. Believe it or not, I actually don't have a problem with this. In concept. But the execution of this idea in the story is fucking awful, and there is no denying it. First of all, there is absolutely no explanation of how this actually happened. Sure, the 15th Doctor tells us that it's a myth, and it doesn't exist. That doesn't counter my statement from before. Why does this happen? Don't know. What's gonna happen to the 14th Doctor? I don't know. Will he eventually just die from old age and become the 15th Doctor? I don't know. Even if he does do that, does he just fade away? I don't know. Does he meet with the 15th Doctor and they become one again? I don't know. Is he just going to regenerate when he sees fit? I don't know. If he dies again, does he become the 15th Doctor or does he just cease to exist? I don't know. Is there now just always going to be two Doctors that exist forever? I don't know. Does this happen to all Time Lords? Surely not, because we would have seen it before. Or is this just exclusive to the Doctor?
I don't know, but there it is.
The point being, this is not remotely explained at all, and it kills this story. Don't get me wrong, there is a lot before and after this scene in this story, which is superb. But the fact that this law-bending, undoubtedly enormous event just happens, and there is literally no explanation for it. It is without doubt the most style over substance thing that Davies has ever wrote for this show, and that is extremely disappointing. You literally could have just said that the Toymaker did this, but he seems just as shocked as everyone else is.
What?
The only benefit of me taking so damn long to upload is that I do now have additional context from Series 14. So, what does that add?
When we first met, I said the Toymaker, and defeating him took everything. It ripped me in half.
But you survived.
It tore my soul in half. I can't survive that again.
Oh. so this was caused by the Toymaker. For some reason, him being shot by the galvanic beam is enough to rip his soul in half, even though the Toymaker did nothing to the gun to make it any different, and also, the previous Doctor died to a much more deadly laser, if we're being for real. So, falling off a tower, being shot twice, thrice, fourites, however many times the Doctor gets shot here, and all the other ways he's died isn't enough to split him in half, even though arguably many of these are much, much worse ways to die, but this specific laser, for some unexplained reason, splits the Doctor in two instead of just regenerating normally. Why would you not explain this, you turbo-head brain sausage? It's pretty obvious that Russell did this so that he could just have a multi-Doctor story with a future incarnation of the Doctor instead of a past one, which is an inherently interesting idea that he's played with before. But if you really wanted this conclusion so badly, then I don't see why couldn't he have just had the 15th Doctor arrive in the TARDIS to help out. Given that the Toymaker is such a godlike force, breaking the rules of time wouldn't be too far out of the question. Also, you could still give 14 his happy ending without the bi-generation, because you could just have 15 say he'll die once his mind is healed. Even if he just died in battle or died of old age, that's better than literally just having 2 Doctors exist at all times now, because plot. This is the type of writing style that I've criticised Moffat and Chibnall for years, and seeing the GOAT write like this is so fucking infuriating and disappointing. Also, a fake out regeneration where the Doctor almost regenerates but doesn't actually? Where have I seen that before?
I'm regenerating. Now then. You fucking...
However, despite all of that being built on contrivance and bullshit, I cannot deny that the debut of the 15th Doctor is thoroughly exceptional. Almost immediately, Ncuti captures the mannerisms and characteristics of the Doctor with his own spin on them, and he does a fantastic job in the small chunk of this episode that he's in. And at the time of this part of the script being written, the first part of the finale airs tomorrow, and I can safely say he's already cemented himself as one of my favourite Doctors, despite being in a few shit episodes.
I'm gonna let it rip.
Quite literally, shit episodes. And his appearance in this story cemented that from the start, he already had it. But despite the objective best Doctor and one of my favourites sharing screen time together, there's no beating around the bush that the resolution to this story is lame as fuck. It suffers from an issue that a lot of Russell's finales suffer from, particularly his first two, where interest and plot points are dropped in favour of the character drama. Now this, most of the time, I actually don't mind. For any new viewers here, you should know that for me personally, characters trump all. Because, especially in the case of Doctor Who, good characters can make up for a shit story, bad characters cannot. Most of Tom Baker's era of Doctor Who is pretty shit. It gets very stale and very repetitive very quickly. But then when you have arguably the most iconic and one of the most brilliant Doctors as the lead, you can see why to this day, this is heralded by many as one of the best eras of the show, despite how bad most of it is. It's the same reason why Series 8 is Capaldi's best series, despite also not being very good. But the Doctor himself is great.
Swallow that. What is it? Trust me.
What did you give him?
Oh, just a spare power set, but I can track the radiation signature. I need to know where they dumped the bodies.
I thought you were saving him!
He was dead already. I was saving us.
Also why I can enjoy 6's era way more than 5's, because despite neither of them being good Doctors, 6 is indefinitely more entertaining.
Still bullying children, eh? Villain! Murderer! Hands on your head!
The point being, I usually don't mind when Russell will sacrifice an interesting story for the character drama, because that's the stuff that he excels at anyway, and usually the whole series would be building up to that said drama, so it would still have a satisfying feeling of conclusion in the finale, even if story beats were dropped, or resolved in ways that aren't amazing. However, that doesn't mean I'm not gonna call it out, especially here when it's this overtly piss poor. Like, after spending nearly what would usually be an entire episode's runtime on building up the Toymaker, how do they defeat him? A game of catch. Which, despite quite literally being the god of games, he still manages to lose.
That's it?
Seriously, I don't think you could have thought of a more boring resolution if you tried. And considering the opening plot point to this story went absolutely nowhere and had no bearing on the narrative or plot, it makes you wonder, why couldn't we have just cut that out and thought of a more interesting way to defeat the Toymaker? Or if you were going to include this pointless plot point, why not have it play into the resolution somehow? What if the self-indulgence was still active and the Doctor, while playing catch, like, moved down to the ground and started getting random people involved to the point where the Toymaker, like, he can't keep up and he has to forfeit or something? Or maybe because it's been thrown in so many different directions, it catches him off guard and he drops it. Anything over the most horribly edited yet intense game of catch ever put to screen! For God's sake! So there's that story resolved, I guess. But a key part as to why this doesn't work compared to Russell's other finales is that it's built on something that doesn't make sense despite the character drama being great. While Series 1 and 2 both have excellent finales filled with excellent drama, it's undeniable that the resolutions to the stories themselves are both kinda mid. Like, the Series 1 resolution is Rose had absorbed the heart of the TARDIS and she'd spread the words across the universe to remind herself to save the Doctor. Makes sense, was set up in Boomtown, but is a little bit of a letdown, but there is still consequences for this. The Series 2 resolution, after the Daleks and Cybermen are going to war because they'd been in the void, travelling between the universes, if the Doctor reverses the signal, it would pull them back in. Again, makes sense, if a bit underwhelming, but there is also consequences for this. The Series 3 finale is actually the best one by far, because the resolution is set up very early in the series, and only works because of the Master's inherent prejudice against humans that the Doctor is aware of and took advantage of. And he also used the Master's own plan against him, making it a personal triumph as well as it is a blow to the Master's ego. This is a brilliant resolution on its own, but it is also made much better by the fact it has consequences. Seriously, if you can get past these two stupid visuals, the Series 3 finale is easily some of the best this show has to offer.
We are changing history. Not just Earth, the entire universe.
I'm a Time Lord. I have that right.
The Series 4 finale is absolute dog shit, and there's no defending the resolution. For some ungodly reason, the Daleks have a control panel that can control every single Dalek, rendering them useless before the Metacrisis blows them up anyway. Absolute nonsense. Garbage. No defending that in the slightest. But at least, it still had consequences. Unlike this resolution, which can be most compared to a resolution in the vein of Series 1 or 2, because it does make sense that you can defeat the Toymaker this way, but it is lame, and there aren't really any consequences for it. While I do actually like what happens to all of the characters from this, you wouldn't be remiss if they all forgot about this in a couple weeks. Because this specific event being part of the catalyst of the Doctor's mental breakdown ultimately lead him to just get a happy ending. Which is good, don't get me wrong. But where's the downside? Oh, your soul was retroactively torn in half. Doesn't seem to bother you that much. At least after all of Russell's finales, even the bad one, all of the characters are different after it. There is consequences, it changes them as people. Rose and Martha both massively grew up, and so did Jack have to because he had to live for hundreds of years. The Ninth Doctor literally died, And Donna had the most tragic fate of all, losing all of the brilliance. But here, everyone just gets a happy ending.
Well, that was a load of shit. Can we sue?
Out the butt.
Yeah, we should sue.
Where have I seen this before? I mean, that's probably just a reference though, so we can let it slide. Finally back to the episode now, and this is where it picks up again, despite what I just said. So they banish the Toymaker and 15 consoles 14 before we finally get a full reveal of why David Tennant is playing the Doctor again. And that's because, like said to us before, the Doctor hasn't stopped before. The Doctor has been put through so much shit over the years, and his body and mind have told him it's time to stop and settle down for a bit before he has a complete mental collapse. And this is an absolutely marvellous way to naturally integrate the return of David Tennant to the show. Because if you really think about it, the 10th Doctor was the one who suffered and lost the most in his era. And that one thing that was taken away from him repeatedly was the notion of settling down and having a family. Something that this Doctor wanted from the very start. This character arc for the Doctor had started even before he'd regenerated into David Tennant.
Who said you're not important? I've travelled to all sorts of places, done things you couldn't even imagine, but you two, street corner, 2 in the morning, getting a taxi home. I've never had a life like that.
A perfectly sold reason as to why the Doctor got his old face back, so he could finally get what he wanted for all of those years without having to worry about it being taken away from him again. Years of thinking he was better off alone because of how much he loved and lost all of those years ago, being put into fruition now. And honestly, could you think of a better way to unofficially end this first run of New Who than having the old guard, the prefixed version of the Doctor, sign off and hand it off to the new Doctor? And what a better way to represent this as a whole than having the face of Doctor Who as a whole pass the torch to someone else. Also, given that the New Who Doctors have been constantly carrying a burden for 18 years at this point, taking that weight off the character's shoulders and going back to basics should feel fresh and new. And it has. It's a shame that for some reason in this scene they just reduce Ncuti to telling us Doctor Who lore that realistically most people will already know. I think that's more so an issue with this idea of a soft reboot as a whole. I haven't really touched on this in any of them, but if this is meant to be a jumping on point for new viewers, then this is like the worst way to get them hooked in. As if it would be easier to get people into Doctor Who saying, oh yeah, watch the 60th anniversary special, the first episode of which is The Star Beast, which is terrible, and it also features the man who everybody universally knows as Doctor Who, and the companion who is universally recognised as the best companion. But you'd then think, oh well, this was years ago, why are they here again? Oh, they brought them back so we could continue the story because the ratings sucked. TLDR, I don't think a soft reboot was necessary, but also it doesn't really matter that much. Anyways, back to the point. I don't know why they gave Ncuti this line, which is just lore.
Our whole lifetime, that Doctor that first met the Toymaker never, ever stopped. Put on trial, exiled, key to time, all the devastation of Logopolis, Adric, River Song. Sarah Jane has gone, can you believe that for a second? End Rose, but the Time War, Pandorica, Mavic Chen. We fought the gods of Ragnarok and we didn't stop for a second.
Like, damn. I kind of already knew all that, but cool story, bro. Donna also perfectly complements this scene by once again perfectly reinforcing why she was so useful to him, by being the one to convince him to stay. Again, the pre-established relationship between these two really helps this story a lot, and that cannot be understated. Especially seeing as they both went through so much different stuff in the 15 years since Series 4. We can see that Donna settled down and matured, while the Doctor just kept going. Never stopped. No wonder he's at his wit's end. And in a meta way, I think it does also help that David Tennant has aged appropriately, and given how he's playing the jaded, tired, and depressed Doctor in the story, it does really sell how he seems to be trying to cling on to what the Doctor is. But he just can't anymore. When I say aged appropriately, by the way, I mean like, look at Catherine Tate. How does she look almost identical? I mean, obviously it's all down to performance because they've both aged really well, because, I mean, damn. If I look this good in my 50s, I'll be pleased.
You changed your face, and then you found me to come home.
It's all coming back. I hate you. It's all coming back. You understand? I don't like it. I don't like to think about it. It's...
Also, I know a few people have issue with the TARDIS duplicating, but honestly, I'm not too opposed to it. I think it makes perfect sense that both Doctors get their own prize for winning the game, and that 15's gift is giving himself another TARDIS so that 14 can keep his own. It's a nice way to keep the story going and a nice way to end the story of the new Who Doctors. And hey, it's even wheelchair accessible. That's awesome, who's gonna hate on that? That being said, given that one of the biggest problems with this story's resolution is that there's no consequences, don't you think it would have been a lot more impactful had 14 decided to just pass the TARDIS over to 15? Because yes, while the duplication does make sense, you've got to now think there is now 2 TARDISes in existence.
I don't take the TARDIS into battle!
Because it's made of wood!
Because it's the most powerful ship in the universe and I don't want it falling into the wrong hands!
It might be slightly over given that I just had to compare this story to a line in Series 7. Definitely wasn't just because I watched it the night before, so it was the first example I could think of or anything. I get that this is an anniversary special, so you don't really want to end it on a typically sad Russell T Davies ending. But come on, even the 50th had a better bittersweet ending than this. In the 50th, it's a story that ruined the Time War narrative and is solely responsible for Hellbent.
It's all one title. Gallifrey falls no more.
Still out there?
Where is it indeed?
Yes.
Lost. Shh.
Is that what I'm supposed to do now? Go looking for Gallifrey?
Or perhaps it doesn't matter either way. Who knows? Who knows?
Wait, why are Shirley and Mel just waiting out here aimlessly? So 15 gets a nice setup which does leave you very excited for the new era, and I'm not gonna lie, as much as I wasn't a big fan of 15's theme when I first heard it, when it played in the episode, it sounds great. I just pray to God that it doesn't get overplayed and dumbed down to death like 11 and 12's themes. We then end on a very lovely scene of the Doctor finally settled down with the family, and the final interaction between the Doctor and Donna, I won't lie, it brought us to tears.
I've never been so happy in my life.
As much as anyone can be wrong about the 10th Doctor, it's undeniable that finally seeing him happy after all of this time is just so satisfying. It took nearly 20 goddamn motherfucking years of watching David Tennant as Doctor Who, and he finally, after all of this time and all of that suffering and loss, got his happy ending. And it is the most perfect way to end this story imaginable. Twice now, Russell has managed to bring out emotion in me while watching Doctor Who. Something that I haven't felt in a very long time. If only this episode wasn't so half-baked, I could have cut the title in half. So, that was The Giggle. And honestly, that was one of the best stories in years, which is really surprising thing to say, especially after reviewing Wild Blue Yonder. But this story really blew my mind with how well it told this end of the Doctor's character arc and journey. Finally, after all of this time, the Doctor can rest and be happy with his loved ones, told in such a meaningful and poignant way, with his best friend at his side, while softly rebooting the show and bringing us into an exciting new era. Is what I would love to say. But you haven't listened to me tear this bullshit apart for this long for me to start lying to you now. Yeah, well, I do actually still quite enjoy this episode, as it undoubtedly has a lot to like. Almost everything to like in this story is extremely double-edged, or it's just straight up built on contrivance and bullshit. Like, literally everything suffers from this. The Toymaker. Absolutely fantastic villain, even though he's very obviously shamelessly lifted from Series 3. He commands your attention with all of the screen time he has. He's perfectly presented with so many creative ideas, leading to such awesome moments made all the better by Neil Patrick Harris's superb performance. But then he's also used for some whack dialogue that might get no payoff, and is defeated in the lamest way imaginable. Mel's back, and she's had an insane upgrade from her original run in Doctor Who, but also it makes no sense as to how she even got here. Being as young as she is also makes a massive plot hole, and she doesn't really add anything to the story, and it's just kind of there for decoration. Like, oh look, it's Mel! Yeah, I mean, I like Mel now, you made her likeable, but you gonna do anything else with her? Super interesting concept with the Toymaker making humanity turn against themselves, which could lead to the end of the world, is only shown with randoms who we don't know for less than 2 minutes, and Kate for a minute, and then it's just dropped as if it didn't even happen. Donna's pretty good in this episode throughout, but it's undeniable that she feels way less integral to the plot than she did in the last 2 stories. Basically just being reduced to worrying about the Doctor and reminding us of the past. But she couldn't have really been as integral to this part of the story anyway, because this part of the story is about the Doctor needing to retire and sort himself out. Which is a great story beat. Which unfortunately feels way too sudden because the Star Beast did nothing with it, and it was only set up briefly before this episode dumps it on us, as if it's been built up for ages. Ncuti Gatwa's introduction to Doctor Who is awesome, and it's very obvious from this appearance alone that he's going to be a great Doctor. And he is. But he's also introduced through actual nonsense, which is still yet to get an explanation, even though this is being written more than 6 months after this episode released, making the Giggle, overall, a confusing mess. But it is also still alright. I usually don't like to give out scores in videos because it can make keeping track of every story too much of a hassle, and people will then be like, oh, you gave this episode this, but this episode this? You can't be trusted. Which is a very disingenuous way to dismiss criticism without actually listening to what's being said. But I think I'd struggle to give this episode anything than a 5 or a 6. Honestly, looking back, maybe even it could be a 4, and the Star Beast could go down to a 3. Because while it is filled to the brim with excellent ideas and moments, almost all of them are eventually bogged down in some way that makes them way less effective than they should be. It's very obvious that this episode needed more time to flesh itself out more, or simply just cut out certain parts of the story. You could also just make it less of a rip-off of your own work, because overall, while the Giggle is somewhat brilliant, it is also a confused mess, with so much missed potential you could write a whole book on it. Thank you all so much for watching. If you managed to make it this far and watched all of my 60th specials reviews, I really appreciate it, because you have no idea how much of a struggle I've had getting these videos out. Not only because of copyright, but because of my busy, overly booked, hectic life. I have no time to do YouTube anymore, but I do quite enjoy doing it. I have no idea what is next for the channel, but hopefully I'll see you all again soon. Goodbye.
Really? This? In my house? Yeah. Not in my house, boy.
You shut the fuck
But
up!
also,
You shut the fuck
let it
up!
get you a little bit.
You shut the fuck up! You shut the fuck up! I hope you die in a fire!
This guy? Epic. I like this guy. This is an admirable human being. I approve this guy.
Who are you? Never tell me how to...
Write Doctor Who. Russell T. Davies. Chris Chibnall.
Who are you?
That is complete gibberish.
No, I'm not sure about that one. I don't know if that checks out.
That's the game of the 21st century. They shout, and they type, and they cancel.
So the Doctor tries to shop. So the fuck. And oh my god. I'm so old. And not even being able to think of a made-up name. Bollocks. Oh my god. This is why you don't record on New Year's Day. It's pretty obvious that Russell did this just so that he could have a multi-doctor... That was shit. So similarly to the... Oh, fuck. That's the start of the other fucking video, man. Oh, no.